Fractured Paths by Matt Edsand. Narrated by Matt Edsand. Chapter 1 United Alliance Eastern Plains. Private Santiago glanced at Callum. The man was doing his routine of walking about at night. Santiago didn't know why Callum needed a walk. Maybe the man needed some fresh air. But he had been doing it for 2 nights in a row. Each time Santiago made sure Callum never spotted him. Callum's need to walk had become an excellent opportunity for Santiago. The orders from Martin had been clear. Terminate Callum immediately. When Santiago had read the orders, a few questions had filled his mind. Why kill this man? Although Santiago understood the orders, Martin was asking him to take a great risk that could expose him. Nonetheless, Santiago had dismissed all his thoughts. There was no time to dwell on them, and it might force him to make a mistake. All he had to do was follow the orders. Nothing else was expected. Once the mission was completed, Santiago would send an encrypted transmission back. It was the first time he was going to have to send a transmission. Santiago needed to figure out how to do it. Because of that, it wouldn't happen so quickly. He'd probably need a few days. Santiago didn't like the idea of sending transmissions out of the base. The stakes were high that any transmission might be intercepted. To ensure that didn't happen, Santiago had to find a way and time it properly. To him, the whole process was frustrating, but that was part of being a spy on the United Alliance base. Over time, he had been fortunate to get the favor of Captain Aria. That had opened doors to understanding how the United Alliance was trying to figure out the Vezat alien threat. Santiago had played along, giving them bits and pieces of intelligence, enough to ensure he earned their trust. Even then, the utmost care had to be taken to ensure no one grew suspicious of him. Santiago turned his attention back to Callum. The man had stopped and was gazing at the fence. Santiago flicked his eyes about this part of the base. No movement. The last patrol had walked by a minute ago. They wouldn't be back for another 10 minutes. There also weren't any recording devices in this section of the base. No better time than now to execute his plan. Santiago pulled out his small arms weapon and held it behind his back. He then approached Callum. Hi. Callum turned around nervously. Hi. I noticed you like to walk at this hour of the night, Santiago smiled. You noticed it, huh? Santiago tightened his grip on his weapon. I also like doing night walks. It helps me clear my thoughts from a busy day. My name's Santiago. I heard about you from Sergeant Ramos, Callum said. The tension in the man's expression had all but disappeared. Oh, yeah, he mentioned you were instrumental in deciphering the Vezat language. Santiago chuckled. I think I got lucky. That was far from the truth. Santiago had been privy to the Vezat alien language when he had first met Martin. Martin had given him the opportunity to study the language in return for his loyalty. Santiago hadn't been able to resist the offer. However, he had been shocked when Captain Aria had sent him part of the symbols to the Vezat language. At that point, all he could do was play the part of someone trying to decipher the alien language. And it worked like a charm. No one, including the general, had been suspicious. In fact, the opposite had happened, with him getting access to an alien vessel. Although it had been his first time studying the alien vessel, he had kept his poker face on and continued to play the part. Now it was time to be his real self. How much do you know about me? Callum asked. Not much. Then Santiago pretended to look past the man and frowned. Callum turned around to gaze at whatever he was looking at. Santiago pulled out his weapon and hit Callum on the head. The man collapsed to the ground. Santiago looked around before dragging the man behind the storage building. There was no way he could have shot Callum without alerting everyone on the base. After dragging Callum behind the building, Santiago holstered his weapon and pulled out a curved weapon. It was part of the Vezat's arsenal. When Martin had passed him the weapon, he had been given clear instructions to only use it in an emergency or for a serious situation. Tonight was one of those situations. Although Santiago wasn't sure how it worked, he was about to see the weapon in action. He pressed it against Callum's heaving chest and fired it once. No sound. That was a relief. As Santiago stepped back, his eyes widened. Callum's body disintegrated in front of his eyes. Chapter 2: Secret Facility, Gibson Desert. Captain Williams touched the smooth surface of the hull of the shuttle in front of him. A shiver went down his spine at what the coalition forces had achieved. The shuttle was a breakthrough for the faction. He was certain that it would propel them to space travel on a wider scale than anyone else had been able to do. "Captain," a voice said behind him. Williams turned to find a young blond man in uniform staring at him. The man saluted him. "At ease, Lieutenant," Williams said. Lieutenant Holmes was one of the pilots that was assigned to Williams. Williams had read his profile. Although still young, Holmes had been a helipod pilot for a few years. That experience would be invaluable, but piloting a shuttle was a whole other beast. No one knew what to expect, even a pilot. "Are we ready to take this shuttle out for a test drive?" Williams asked. Holmes' eyes brightened. "Yes, sir. I completed all the checks an hour ago. We're good to go." Williams then slapped the hull one time. "Let's get to it." With that, Holmes led him to the back of the shuttle and they stepped in through the hatch door. As Williams set foot into the shuttle, the newness of the vessel hit his nostrils. It was a new craft smell. His boots echoed against the fresh decking as they made their way to the cockpit. Everything screamed of a newness that Williams had never seen in a few years. War would do that to a person. Even the bulkheads above had no scuffs. Reaching the cockpit, Williams sat down beside Holmes, who was already studying the controls. Today was going to be the first run for Williams in this shuttle. Although General Stiles had indicated that Williams could also fly the shuttle, he preferred to let Holmes take charge, at least for now. Williams admired the sleek cockpit as Holmes' fingers danced across the console. With a few clicks, the shuttle woke up, its engines making Williams' boots vibrate. A soft hum permeated throughout the cockpit as the lights came on. Williams pulled the safety harness around his body and made sure it was tight. Although Holmes was an experienced pilot, it was a new shuttle, and Williams wasn't taking any chances. No human had ever flown a shuttle like this, at least to Williams' knowledge. Humanity was venturing forward into a new territory. He felt an excitement in his throat. "All systems are online," Holmes reported. Williams offered a single nod. "Sir, this is different from flying a helipod," Holmes remarked. "How so?" "It's much easier, I believe." Williams nodded as Holmes gently pulled on the controls. Williams was impressed at the delicate way Holmes handled the shuttle. The shuttle lifted off the surface and Holmes turned it around. It was then that Williams noticed the launch bay opening on the far left wall. A glimmer of a containment field caught his eyes. "All ready to go," Holmes announced. "Proceed." Holmes pushed on the controls and the shuttle lurched forward. The safety harness pressed against Williams' body as the shuttle began drifting towards the launch bay opening. Soon they were flying over Gibson Desert. The stars across the night sky sang out to Williams. It was breathtaking that he was seated inside a space shuttle. He could never have dreamt of it. Soon he would be flying up into those stars, but not tonight. "What kind of weapons do we have on board?" Williams asked as he studied the view screen and the harsh terrain outside. "We have missiles and lasers for now." "For now?" "Yeah, I heard the engineers are planning on adding a bit more weapons onto this shuttle, but they said it'll take some time." "Like what?" "Maybe a few turrets on the rear?" "Anyway, let's see if the shuttle flies as good as it looks." Holmes kept his fingers on the controls as the shuttle kept low to the surface while traveling across the desert terrain. Williams relaxed and leaned back on his chair. The initial anxiety of flying in the shuttle had disappeared. A new frontier lay ahead for humanity. Chapter 3: Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Kathy stared at her food on the table. Ever since she had been kidnapped from Anderson and imprisoned in this alien base, Kathy had told herself that sooner or later someone would come to rescue her. But that hope had slowly begun to diminish after that first week. It was now more than a few weeks since being captured. To her surprise, she had found a few other prisoners with her in this facility. "You better eat your food," Benjamin whispered. "If not, they might come and question you." Kathy looked at the Vezat alien guards at the door. Neither of them was looking in her direction, but she couldn't become complacent. Just yesterday during lunch, one of the Vezat guards had approached another man and demanded he eat his food. When the man had scowled, the Vezat guard had hit him on the back, after which he had been taken away by force. No one else had tried to stop him. Kathy had wanted to stand and help the man, but Benjamin had held her back. Kathy was glad for it because, if not, she could have ended up in a bad situation. Ever since being imprisoned here, Kathy had befriended Benjamin. The man was calm and cool in front of the Vezat, and more friendly than the other 4 people who were imprisoned with her. Kathy picked up a spoon and reluctantly dug into her food. When she had been brought to this alien base, the food had tasted horrible. She had even felt like vomiting on that first meal, but over time she had learned to endure it. There was no other choice, and every day the lunch and dinner meals were a variation of the same basic type of food. What's with the food today, Kathy asked. Does it seem different? You noticed a bit of taste too, huh? Benjamin smirked. Kathy nodded. Maybe the Vezat aliens were trying to fix the horrible tasting food. It would be a small victory for them, but she didn't trust the Vezat aliens. Being captured by aliens had been shocking to say the least. At first she had thought the aliens were humans in costumes, but that theory had been debunked when they had taken her on their space vessel. Aliens were something she had left in the realm of fiction, but the reality that they were amongst humanity had been like someone driving a knife into her heart. I'm thinking they're finally figuring out our taste buds, Benjamin muttered. I think so too. I'm also guessing Martin probably has something to do with it. The first time Kathy had observed a human working alongside the Vezat, she had been speechless. She thought she had imagined it. After all, why would a human willingly work with these aliens? Despite that, Martin had appeared and even spoken briefly to the group. He had warned them to behave, not cause any problems, and eventually they would be returned to their families. Benjamin didn't believe a word of it, Kathy agreed. They had seen so much, and it was unlikely the aliens would simply let them go. The Vezat would more likely kill them when they were no longer useful. Do you think the Vezat are still forcing our parents to do things for them, Kathy asked. That had been Benjamin's theory. When he had first announced it to the group of them, Kathy had been shocked. However, it did make sense. There had to be a reason as to why they were being kept alive as prisoners. Kathy worried for her father. He had taken care of her when her mother had passed away. He was the only family left. She didn't know what she would do without him. Yes, it's the only reason we are still alive. If that was true, their time was limited. Sooner or later, the Vezat would no longer need their parents. Kathy took another mouthful of food and swallowed it with a wince. How much time do we have left? Benjamin shrugged. I can't tell for sure, but we haven't seen Martin for a few days. Did you notice that? Kathy offered a single nod. What do you think they're up to? I've noticed a bit more tense expressions on the aliens. I think something's going on beyond this base. Kathy finished her food, picked up the empty plate and returned it to a plate holder. She then returned and sat down opposite Benjamin. The others, which included 3 men, were seated on a separate table. Kathy flicked her eyes at them. The 3 guys weren't talking. Instead, they were just looking at nothing. Kathy frowned. She and Benjamin had tried to make friends with them. However, none of them had seemed interested. Kathy couldn't blame them. No one wanted to be prisoners of the aliens. Being the lone female amongst the 5 prisoners had also been challenging for Kathy. Despite being friends with Benjamin, she couldn't confide in him on certain things. Then Benjamin nudged Kathy. She's back. Kathy glanced in the direction of his gaze. A female alien in a white uniform was standing on the other side of the glass wall staring at them. Who is she? I heard she's a captain in this base, Benjamin said. Really? Captain Cofia, I think that's what they call her. Oh, Kathy said, unsure how Benjamin had found out the names of some of their alien captors. Then again, she had learned that Benjamin was quite resourceful when he needed to be. Kathy stared at the female alien, her eyes locked with that of the female alien before she turned and disappeared down the corridor. Chapter 4, Rest Area, Highway 51. Captain Aria woke up in her transport pod. She stepped out and stretched her body. Although it had been risky, she had chosen to sleep in her transport pod last night. As the sunlight shone onto the top of her transport pod, she grabbed a drink and took several sips. The meeting time with Cofia was still an hour away, but this was the position where she was supposed to meet the female alien. Aria had intentionally driven her transport deeper into the wooded area to ensure no one driving along the highway would notice her. The last thing she wanted was to be noticed by a random traveler. She twisted her body and arms, locked her transport pod and walked down to the small lake at the end of one of the trails. She knelt by the edge of the lake and threw some water over her face. The cool water was refreshing and complemented the fresh air around her. It also helped clear her thoughts. Last night, sleeping in the transport pod had been difficult. Aria thought she would have drifted off to sleep, but she hadn't. Instead, she had been thinking about the general's words and Cofia's offer. Had she been duped by the Vezat? Was that possible? She couldn't conclude anything. She would be the first to admit that they were dealing with aliens who could probably do many things. But if that were possible, why wouldn't the Vezat do that to all the humans? Why need to kidnap Mr. Mullin's child to force him to do their bidding? The Vezat could have just brainwashed Mr. Mullins and taken control of him. Something didn't add up. In fact, Aria should have told General Duncan about it. Maybe that could have convinced him. Despite that, Aria recalls seeing Duncan's eyes. The man looked firm in his beliefs and nothing she could have said would have made a difference. Aria suppressed a sigh. Nonetheless, she was glad when her extension of leave had been approved. It seemed like General Duncan didn't mind her taking a longer break. She had been surprised that he hadn't forced her to see a mental health specialist. At the same time, she was relieved. At least General Duncan respected her privacy and own choices regarding the whole matter. She found a bench and sat down on it. Her stomach growled. She pulled out a ration pack, opened it, and swallowed its contents. That would have to do for now. Aria flicked her eyes around the wooded area. The peacefulness of her surroundings captured her heart. Aria missed this part of life. Somehow, in the grind of working on the base, she had lost her love for nature. It was unfortunate. As she kept scanning the area, she drank in the completeness of nature. Maybe she could retire from the United Alliance and find a cabin in the woods and live in peace. It was tempting. A beep brought her back to reality. She pulled out a device from her pocket. It was a reminder that there were only 15 minutes left before her appointment with Captain Cofia. Aria closed her eyes and tried her best to relax. She didn't want to fight her thoughts about going behind a commanding officer's back. No good would come from dwelling on those thoughts. And if she got caught, there would be no justification for her actions. People would see her as a traitor. Again, Aria tried to push those thoughts aside. Traitor or not, she had made up her mind. No one really knew about the Vezat aliens' endgame. If they wanted to conquer and destroy humanity, Aria being branded as a traitor would be the least of their problems. Humanity was on the verge of extinction. It sounded ridiculous. However, that was the truth. General Duncan may not accept it, but Aria knew it was inevitable, unless the Vezat was stopped. "I'm glad you came," a voice said. Aria swirled around with her weapon. Captain Cofia was standing a few meters away from her. Chapter 5, General's Office, United Alliance 1. General Duncan drummed his fingers on his desk as he stared at Sergeant Monroe. "What do you mean that Callum's missing?" "He didn't report for his work with the others," Monroe replied. "Then I went looking for him in his quarters. It appeared he hadn't even slept in it." Duncan frowned. "Maybe he slept somewhere else. I had a few men search the entire base, but there's no sign of him." "Did you check the recording devices at the entrance?" Monroe offered a nod. "No one left the base last night." Duncan raised his voice. "Callum must be somewhere. No one just disappears from this base. Find him." Monroe nodded and left his presence. Duncan couldn't believe the incompetence of his soldiers. How could they lose a single civilian inside the base? It was during these times that he wished Captain Aria was back from her extended leave. The woman had requested an extension and Duncan had been happy to provide it to her. Aria needed a break, and he hoped the time away from the base would help her reorganize herself. He had wanted to tell Aria to see a mental health expert, but he decided against it. That was something she would need to do on her own initiative. He didn't want to force anything on her. A comms buzzed on his console. Duncan looked at the console and sighed. It was General Stiles from the United Alliance faction. Why did the man need to call him? Wasn't one call enough? The two factions didn't need to work together so closely. Although it was Duncan who had reached out to Stiles, he had hoped that all the collaboration could happen one level below him. Hello? General Duncan, were you thinking of not picking up my call? Stiles asked. Of course not. I hope not. Anyway, there's a reason for my call, okay? My Captain Williams, who I heard you know very well, is now being moved to take part in a secret project, Stiles said. Duncan struggled to control his emotions at the mention of his brother's name. What kind of secret project? So, now you're interested in us because it involves your brother, huh? Duncan frowned, trying to ignore Stiles' insinuation. I didn't say that. You didn't have to say so, Stiles said. Do you want to know what your brother is helping us with? Duncan hated playing games with Stiles. Yes, I want to know. Captain Williams is in charge of our new Space Force. Duncan's jaw dropped. He had expected something shocking, but this was beyond his imagination. Stiles seemed pleased with himself. I'm glad you're stunned. My brother isn't a pilot. In fact, Williams never liked heights much. Duncan still recalled once taking a hike with his brother. During that hike, their path had led them along a canyon. At one point, Williams had frozen in his tracks and Duncan had to step in to help bring his brother back from the edge. It had been a harrowing experience. After that, Williams had sworn to stay away from the edge of canyons. Nonetheless, Duncan was surprised his brother had agreed to this new role. Then again, knowing General Stiles, Williams probably didn't have a chance to reject it. I never said he was going to be a pilot. He's in charge of the Space Force. Duncan managed to recover from the initial shock. Does that mean the coalition forces have developed a space vessel? Not one vessel, Stiles smirked. Duncan's eyes widened. I see I got your attention now. How many? You know I can't tell you that sensitive information, General. Even Captain Williams hasn't seen all the vessels. But he'll get that chance sooner or later. Duncan doubted that General Stiles had just called so that he could boast of his new space vessels. What do you want from me? It's about time you asked me that question. I've been waiting for it. Duncan waited, shuffling his feet. Stiles wouldn't have revealed so many secrets without an agenda. I want to work with your faction, Stiles said. We can't defeat the Vezat aliens alone. I need your pilots to join Captain Williams' team. The more pilots we have, the better our chances of engaging the enemy. Duncan scratched his head. Pilots? Was that all this call was about? Duncan frowned. I presume I caught you by surprise, Stiles smirked. What did you think I was going to ask for? It doesn't matter what I thought. It does. Duncan ignored the mind games Stiles was again trying to play with him. I can provide you with a few pilots. Excellent, Stiles replied. I'll get my people to contact your side. I look forward to our close collaboration to defeat the aliens. With that, the comms ended. Duncan placed his hands behind his head. He would need to update the United Alliance Council. The coalition forces had leapfrogged everyone else with their new space force. Chapter 6, Rest Area Highway 51. Aria put her weapon back into her holster. It still felt strange standing beside an alien being without a weapon. However, that was something she would need to get used to, especially if she was going to work with Captain Cofia. I believe your commanding officer gave you permission to meet me, right? Cofia asked. Aria hesitated. Cofia's eyes widened. Are you saying you're here on your own accord? I'm on leave from work and on my own, Aria said as she sat back down on the bench. Aria stared into the forest as she heard Cofia walk up to the bench and sit beside her. You're taking a great risk being here then, Cofia said. Do you want to reconsider and leave? Aria looked surprised. I don't understand. We both know what it means to follow the chain of command, Cofia explained. But you broke that when you saved me and killed Juram. Aria countered. I did what I had to do for the greater good. Then I am also here to work with you for that same reason, Aria smiled. But you have a choice. I didn't. Huh? I came here with my kind for a different reason, not what Captain Sudi is trying to accomplish now. Aria cocked her head. Captain Suti, my commanding officer. He has waited years for his revenge on humanity. Why? I don't think I have time to get into the past with you. We should focus on the purpose of our meeting. It's already too dangerous for us both to be out here. Aria flicked her eyes about. I don't believe anyone comes out here. Not since the faction wars began years ago. Even then, there are spies everywhere. The tone Cofia used sent shivers down Aria's spine. Cofia looked like someone who had endured a lot. Again, Aria had many questions that came to her mind, but this wasn't the time nor place to get into them. What do you want me to do? Aria asked. Nothing. I don't understand. I want to stop my kind from inflicting destruction on humanity. You mentioned that the Vezat want to invade Earth. Cofia offered a reluctant nod. There's a plan for more of our vessels to arrive on the moon. Aria narrowed her eyes. Are you saying there's a Vezat base on the moon? It's been there for years, but only recently has Captain Suti activated it. Now, that moon base is going to be a launching pad for our forces when they invade Earth. A sense of urgency began to arise in Aria. We must stop it. I must inform my faction. One thing at a time. I need your help to first disable the Vezat base here on Earth and help me free the 5 humans trapped there. Aria was reeling from the fact that 5 humans were being kept as prisoners by the Vezat. For now it's 5, but Suti has plans to increase that number. I am against this kind of kidnapping. I want to ask you something random, Aria said. Cofia hesitated. Okay. Can the Vezat brainwash us humans and make them do their will? Cofia chuckled. Aria crossed her arms. Well, can you or not? We can't. I wish we could do that, but your kind have been watching too many of your shows on aliens. You know about that? We've been watching humanity for years. But I don't want to get distracted by talking too much about the past. The present has too many dangers that must be dealt with. Cofia then passed Aria a device. What's this? It contains the position of our base in a valley. Aria took the device and studied the position. She then opened the device and checked it. Your base is in Granite Valley? You were quick to identify it. That's only a 3-hour drive from this position. Cofia nodded with a smile. I know it sounds incredible, but we managed to keep the base hidden for years. How? We have ways of ensuring your sensors can't detect us. Aria shouldn't have been surprised by that piece of information. The Vezat had been able to hide their base using their own advanced technologies. Aria was tempted to ask more about the technologies used but decided against it. There would be time later to find out the details. You do know that I'm one person, Aria interjected. I don't think I'll be able to convince my commanding officer to attack the base. One person is more than anything I have, and my objective is not for you to attack the base. Any attack on the base would force Captain Suti's hands. He wouldn't hesitate to terminate all the humans and even blow up the base. He would destroy everything. Suti would never permit anything in that base to fall into the hands of the enemy. Other than those 5 humans, are there others helping your kind? Unfortunately, there is, Cofia said with a sigh. My captain is skilled in getting humans to help him. Your kind harbor a lot of hate, and Suti was able to leverage upon it to get them on his side. His side? The words didn't go unnoticed by Aria. The more Cofia spoke about Suti, the more Aria realized that the female Vezat was dead against her commanding officer. How many are involved? Aria asked. Another 3 on the base itself, but there are others roaming about the planet who are sympathetic to the Vezat cause. Aria's jaw dropped. Across the planet? What numbers are we talking about? Aria couldn't believe there were so many humans working with the Vezat across the planet. It appeared the Vezat aliens and Captain Suti had successfully developed a network. Cofia shook her head. I'm not privy to that kind of information. Suti keeps his work with Martin, who is a human leader at the base, to himself. He doesn't even tell me nor the other leaders. Aria sensed the frustration behind Cofia's words. Suti was starting to look like a dangerous Vezat leader. Did you hear of the vessel that approached your base's perimeter? Aria gave a single nod. That was Sooty testing your human capabilities. He didn't even tell any of us about it until it was over. I suspect Martin advised him on it. Are you saying your captain is taking advice from a human? Sooty will do whatever he needs as long as it helps him complete the mission. He will use anyone and anything he needs. And his endgame is a full-on invasion of Earth? Aria asked. For now, that's as much as he has told me. Is that truly his endgame? I can't tell you that for certain. In that device are some instructions. Follow them carefully, and we'll meet again soon. Aria nodded. Cofia stood, looked at her, and then left the area. Aria waited, staring into the forest. The peacefulness she had enjoyed earlier had all but vanished. A new determination had come across her mind. She was going to help Cofia free those humans. How dare the Vezat hold captives? Although Aria was only one person, she believed that with Cofia's help, they would be able to do what was needed. Aria got to her feet and walked back to her transport, a spring in her steps. Chapter 7, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. General Duncan walked out of his office and down the corridor. He was losing his patience with Monroe and the rest of his men and women. It had been 3 hours since he had asked Monroe to find Callum. No news had been provided. Surely it couldn't take so long to find a civilian on the base. Callum had to be somewhere. As Duncan stepped out of his building, he ran into Monroe, who looked surprised. Monroe, what's the status of the whereabouts of Callum? General, I was just coming to see you, Monroe said, taking a step back. We found something that I want you to see. It was about time. Lead the way, Duncan said. He then followed Monroe down the side of the building until they came to part of the fence surrounding the base. Duncan flicked his eyes about, but there was nothing here except for a lonely storage building. Monroe took a few steps forward and pointed at the ground. General, come here, please. Duncan approached the man's side and stared at the ground. What is it? Someone has been dragged along this stretch, Monroe observed, and then pointed to the back of the storage building. The person being dragged was taken all the way to the back of the storage building. Fortunately for us, there was no rain overnight. The marks are still clear in the ground. Duncan gritted his teeth. He observed the markings and took a few steps with Monroe until they were behind the storage building. But after I reached the back of the storage building, there's nothing, Monroe said. That's impossible. It's like everything vanished into thin air. The moment Monroe said it, Duncan's body stiffened. He exchanged a look with the younger man. I think we both know what's going on in here. How could the Vezat alien be inside the base, Monroe said in disbelief. Duncan knelt and studied the ground. There were clues here. There had to be. I want you to analyze the ground here with your device. Monroe didn't flinch as he pulled out his device from his pocket, clicked on it, and began scanning the ground. Duncan got to his feet and crossed his arms. Someone had done something here. Was it related to Callum? They couldn't confirm that yet. What's it saying? I'm getting some minor DNA readings, Monroe replied. Human? Monroe offered a reluctant nod. It only confirmed Duncan's suspicions that someone had killed a human here, and it happened right under his nose. Duncan glanced around. Are there any recording devices around here? Not in this part of the base, Monroe said. The killer had been clever to do whatever needed to be done. I need you to take a DNA reading and check it against databases. Update me as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Monroe scurried away as Duncan looked through the towering chain-link fence into the open fields beyond the base. If a Vezat alien had come in and killed Callum, Duncan wouldn't have been surprised. Had a Vezat alien followed them from his meeting point with Callum? It was possible. Or was his base under constant surveillance by the alien force? Either way, it didn't matter because somehow the Vezat aliens had figured out that Callum had taken refuge in the base. Duncan didn't like this situation one bit. If Captain Aria had been here, she would have been able to give him some advice. Monroe was still young and learning. The man couldn't connect the dots that quickly. Duncan opened the comms at the operations center. General, a male voice answered. I want you to increase the patrols around the fence from tonight, Duncan ordered. Yes, sir. Is there anything else? No. Duncan ended the comms and paused for a long moment. There was no point putting the base on high alert, not without knowing more facts about what had happened here. If the DNA pointed to Callum, it would be a serious breach of his defenses. Chapter 8, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Captain Cofia walked down the corridor and stopped at Suti's office. She knocked on the door and stepped inside. Suti looked up at Cofia. Cofia, I was just looking for you. Yes, Captain. Do you recall that with Eddie Booth there was another conspirator? Suti asked. Cofia vaguely remembered it and nodded. However, right now she couldn't recall the name of the human. Well, our sources indicated that the other man has also been terminated. Cofia forced a smile. That's good news. The man's name was Callum, Suti explained. He apparently reached out to a United Alliance general and they took him back to their base. But our spy inside the base handled the situation. Cofia cocked her head. Spy inside the base? Oh, did I forget to tell you that? Suti smirked. Cofia smiled. Maybe I forgot. There are so many things going on these days. Indeed there is. Anyway, we had planted a spy. By we, I mean it had been Martin's idea. For a human, Martin's very resourceful and cunning. I'm glad he's on our side. In another life, Martin could have been a worthy opponent. Cofia offered a single nod. But we should remain cautious. What do you mean? We have underestimated the humans before. They seem to be able to pull things out that we never considered. The spy inside the base must be careful. The disappearance of Callum will trigger the humans. They won't stop until they find out what really happened. Suti stared at her. What would I do without you, Cofia? I'm glad you stopped by here. I will take note of your concern and discuss it further with Martin. You're right that we cannot assume anything with humans. After years of observing them, they do tend to surprise us. Cofia nodded and left Suti's office. The revelation of a human spy in a United Alliance base had stunned her. Despite that, she had managed to stay calm in front of Suti. Martin was more powerful than Cofia had expected. His level of influence with Suti was worrisome. It appeared Suti was beginning to rely on Martin more and more. That was dangerous. Cofia would need to be careful around him. Cofia continued to walk down the corridor until she came to the glass door where the human prisoners were allowed to eat and sit. She noticed only 4 of them were inside. She turned to the guard. Where's the female? The female human wasn't feeling well, the guard replied. We let her stay in her prison cell. I'll go and see what's the problem, Cofia said and walked away. This was an opportunity Cofia couldn't ignore. The timing was unexpected, but she had to take it. Cofia walked down another corridor until she came to a door with 2 guards. I'm here to check on the female. Both acknowledged her as they opened the door for her. She stepped in and shut the door behind her. In front of her were a row of prison cells, each capable of holding 1 prisoner. Cofia recalled that this extension of the building had been built a few years after the base had been established. At that time, Cofia had questioned herself about the need for it. Even then, amid the Ment Treaty, Suti had the foresight of the things to happen once the Ment Treaty expired. Rumors had swirled then that Suti was preparing a massive plan of actions to do once the period covering the treaty ended. Cofia hadn't believed it then, but Suti had again proved her wrong. Cofia's boots made soft noises as she walked down the row of prison cells. Reaching a cell with the female, Cofia stopped and looked inside. The girl was in her bed, apparently asleep. Cofia was about to turn and leave the girl alone when a voice boomed out from within the cell. I'm not asleep, Captain Cofia. Chapter 9, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. General Duncan walked into the officers' quarters. Monroe was standing talking to a medic. He hadn't been able to wait until Monroe had gotten back to him on the DNA analysis. It was dangerous to just wait around, especially if there was an alien roaming about the base. They had to do something. Despite that, Duncan still felt that scenario was highly unlikely. Someone in his base would have detected an alien loitering about. Monroe, what's the status of the DNA analysis? Duncan growled. Monroe and the medic looked in his direction. General, we just finished looking at the results. Duncan didn't like to be kept waiting, and what are the results? The DNA matches that of Callum, sir, Monroe confirmed. Duncan clenched his jaw. Are we sure of it? Yes, we just confirmed it by running the test multiple times on the DNA, Monroe said. Do we know when Callum was killed? Duncan asked. Monroe turned to the medic who spoke up. We believe it happened around midnight. I need to know who was out of their quarters last night, Duncan ordered. Monroe jerked his head back. You don't think it was a Vezat alien? I want to cover all our bases, Duncan said. Place the base on lockdown immediately. No one is to leave the base. Is that clear? Yes, General, Monroe said and opened the comms. Duncan frowned. Callum had come to his base seeking protection, and Duncan had assured him of his safety. However, Duncan had failed the man. Someone or something had been daring enough to kill Callum within the base. It was astonishing, but also revealed the depth of the Vezat's reach into the factions. If the killer turned out to be human, Duncan would be furious, and it would open a new front that they would need to tackle. Human traitors would be difficult to find and root out. Let me know soon, Duncan said and left the room. Walking back to his office, he pondered on the death of Callum. Increasingly, Duncan felt it was an inside job. Someone inside the base was working for the Vezat aliens. That sounded shocking, but Duncan was going to have to face the reality. Again, his thoughts went to Captain Aria. He sure could use her right now, but he couldn't disturb her. He had insisted on her taking some time off. Duncan decided to keep Aria out of the situation. He would need to handle Callum's death and its aftermath. Reaching his office, Duncan stepped in and took a seat behind his desk. He was still troubled by the entire situation. How could a human be a traitor and work with the Vezat? It didn't make sense. However, Duncan knew better. The worst of humanity always tended to arise at the most unexpected of times. If humans were helping the Vezat, Duncan would root them out and imprison them. Thinking of it left a bitter taste in Duncan's mouth. A buzz on his console pulled Duncan back to reality. General, we found a list of people who were not in their quarters late last night, Monroe admitted. Send it over now. Yes, General. Duncan began drumming his fingers, waiting for the transmission. An alert popped up on his console. He clicked on it. It really wasn't a list of people, though. A document opened showing only a single name. Private Santiago. Chapter 10, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Cofia swirled around and frowned. The raven-haired girl was seated on the bed and staring in her direction. How do you know my name? Cofia asked, glancing back towards the front door. I have my ways, the girl smirked. My name's Cathy. I know. Of course you should know. Why are you here? Cofia approached the front of the prison cell. I didn't see you outside and came to check in on you. She knew there was a recording device along the corridor that also picked up on the audio. She had to be careful with her words. Oh, how thoughtful of you. The sarcasm behind Cathy's words had no place to hide. The woman was angry and she had every right to be. She had been kidnapped against her will while her father was forced to do her bidding. All that changed when Cathy's father died. Cofia wrestled with whether she should tell the woman of her father's death. It was the right thing to do. There's something else I need to tell you, Cofia admitted. If I don't tell you, no one else will. Cathy must have sensed the anguish in her expression as she got off the bed and walked closer to the front of the prison cell. Is this about my father? Cofia nodded reluctantly. He's dead, isn't he? Cathy whispered. How? I expected to receive that news sooner or later. Cofia bowed her head. I'm sorry for your loss. What did you just say? That's what I hear humans say to each other in such situations. Oh, thank you. Can I know if he suffered in his death? Cofia swallowed hard. This was so much more difficult than she had anticipated. It was her first time talking about death with another species. Over the years, she had observed how humans handle the issue of death. It was far different from that of her own kind. There were a lot of human emotions involved when they dealt with death. Some humans never got over it. Some humans turned to other vices to forget about it. I was there when it happened, Cofia whispered. It was quick. He was caught in the crossfire. Kathy grimaced. Thank you for informing me. I know it's not your duty to tell me, but I appreciate it. Cofia nodded and glanced back at the recording device. Then she began to mouth a few words to Kathy, making sure the recording device couldn't pick up on it. I'm going to get you and the rest out of here. Don't react to my words, just nod if you understand. Kathy gave a single nod. The woman was smart enough to keep a neutral expression. Cofia had a good feeling about Kathy. It was unfortunate that her father had passed away. Be ready when I come for you. Again Kathy nodded. This time her face brightened a bit. Cofia turned and walked slowly away, keeping her eyes on the ground. At least she had accomplished her purpose in coming to see Kathy. Telling the woman of her father's death was the least she could do. Surprisingly, Cofia felt a pain in her heart when she had revealed the truth to Kathy. It was an unusual feeling for Cofia, but then again, this was why she felt for humanity. She didn't want to see this species annihilated, just because Suti wanted revenge over humanity. Chapter 11, Lucas's home, Arcadia. Lucas studied the agreement his father had established with the Vezat. Unfortunately, none of the clauses provided any light onto how his father had met the Vezat alien species. Lucas doubted his father had randomly run into an alien being 30 years ago. Such random things didn't happen. Not now and not then. Lucas clicked on his computer and went to the folders of information his father had left behind. There had to be something here, something he had missed, but he didn't see anything. The comms on his console buzzed. Yes, Chris. Chris oversaw security detail. Sir, we have a delivery person walking towards the property. Did you check him out? Lucas asked. Yes, sir. Chris replied. He's clean. What's the issue then? He says he must deliver it personally to you. According to him, that's his instructions. Lucas cocked his head. Personally to me? I told him that might be difficult, Chris insisted. Did you scan the package? Lucas asked. Yes, we did a scan, Chris replied. It's a simple long envelope. Lucas was intrigued by the personal delivery. He rarely got those kinds of deliveries. Something told him that he should check it out. I'll come up. Lucas got off his chair and walked up out of his basement. Reaching the top of his stairs, he opened the door and walked towards the front of his house. Through his diffused glass front doors, he observed the shadow of two figures. Lucas's fingers touched the weapon in his holster. Just a bit of insurance. Reaching the front door, Lucas pressed on the panel beside it and pulled the door inwards. Chris turned towards him. Sir, this is the delivery person. Lucas was impressed to see that two other armed men from his security detail had surrounded the delivery person, who was a young man, probably in his mid-20s. I understand you have something for me. The man hesitated. Are you Lucas meant? Lucas nodded. I'll need to see some identification before I can pass you this package, the man admitted. It was then that Lucas's gaze fell upon a yellow envelope in his hands. Lucas pulled out his driver's license and showed it to the man. The man looked at it carefully before passing the envelope to Lucas. As the man was about to turn and leave, Lucas stopped him. Why did you need to give this to me personally? The man shrugged. I was told that this delivery was supposed to be completed today. If not, I was supposed to destroy it. Lucas frowned, but his heart began to pound. Thank you. The man walked away to his transport pod, got in and left. Lucas turned to Chris. I'll take this from here. Yes, sir, Chris replied. Lucas stepped back into his home and shut the door gently. His hands were trembling, holding onto the envelope. Lucas walked to the living room and sat down on the couch. He stared at the envelope before ripping it open from the edge. He dropped the contents of the envelope onto the coffee table. A small storage device and a single piece of paper fell onto the table. Lucas didn't have to guess who had sent this document. It had to be his father. No one else would stage something like this. Just when Lucas thought he had put behind his father's manipulations, it came roaring back like thunder. Lucas stared at the device without moving from his position. He then picked up the piece of paper. At the top of the paper was his father's name. Lucas heaved a loud sigh. It only confirmed that this package had been sent by his father. Why now? Lucas suspected the device would be able to explain more. He was tempted to throw away the device and crumple the piece of paper. He was sick and tired of his father's manipulations. Why couldn't his father let him live life? Why play these games? Lucas picked up the storage device and held it in his right hand. He studied it and then closed his eyes. Did he want to go down this path? He could walk away and never care. It would be so simple to do that. But he couldn't. That wasn't how he was made. Lucas sighed. His father had made sure he would want to know more. Lucas stood and walked back down to the basement. Time to find out what his father was telling him now. Chapter 12, Highway 118, Central Plains. Captain Aria kept navigating her transport pod down the highway. This part of the highway was empty. She suspected less people used this route. Looking at the device that Cofia had passed, Aria realized that she was halfway to the destination. Cofia's instructions had told her to drive to a position in the mountains. Once Aria reached the destination, she was to activate the device, and Cofia would then meet her there. Aria wondered what was happening back on her base. General Duncan would probably be finding other ways to locate the Vezat aliens. She still struggled as to why the general had chosen not to believe her. Then again, it shouldn't have come as a surprise to her. General Duncan was all about structure and systems. He wasn't the kind of individual to take huge risks. Aria should have thought of that before telling him of her encounter with Captain Cofia. Too late now. She had lost all credibility with the general. She didn't know if he would ever trust her again. Aria sighed. Despite that, Aria didn't regret meeting Cofia. The female alien was genuine in her interest to help humanity. Hearing about the humans imprisoned had made Aria angry. Aria took a sip of her container as she kept her eyes on the road. A single transport pod passed her on the opposite lane. That was the first transport pod she had seen in the last hour. She passed a sign indicating there was a small community, Glendale, a few minutes ahead. Good time as any to take a bit of rest and grab a bite of food. This would probably be the last time she had a decent meal before she infiltrated the alien base. A few minutes later, Aria drove off the highway and navigated a transport pod into a parking lot of a local restaurant. Pulling into an empty parking lot, Aria switched off the transport pod's engine. She flicked her eyes about. A young couple with 2 kids walked past her. Aria opened the door and got out of her transport pod. The air was a little musty. She glanced around Glendale. Across the road were a few small hotels, another restaurant, and some shops. Several transport pods were parked in front of these establishments. Many such small communities still existed across the continent, and most of them chose to remain neutral between the factions. Although every faction would have tried their best to lure them to their side, these communities felt it was better to serve everyone without taking sides. Aria also agreed with these communities' decisions. It made good business sense. Taking sides would have been costly and brought a lot of unnecessary attention and trouble into these communities. Aria turned her attention back to the restaurant in front of her and stepped towards it. The front door opened and a man walked out, giving her a smile. Aria returned the smile and stepped into the restaurant, the bell above the door giving a small jingle. The cool air was refreshing. The interior of the restaurant harkened back to the days before the continent had split up into different factions. A faint tune from a jukebox in one of the corners reached into her ears. This restaurant was trying to cling on to the past, and it seemed to be successfully doing it. A large counter stood in front of her, and behind the counter on the wall were the insignias of the various factions of the continent. A few men seated at the counter looked in her direction before turning back to their foods and drinks. Most of them looked like farmers and truckers. Aria wasn't surprised by the type of crowd in this restaurant. There were booths lined up on the left and right side of the restaurant, overlooking the large windows. Aria turned to the left, which was empty, and walked down to the last booth in the corner and took a seat. Although she was in a neutral location, she didn't want to attract any attention. The smell of coffee tingled her nostrils. A waitress with tired eyes and sunburned skin walked up to Aria's booth and a jug of coffee. Coffee? Yes, please. The waitress placed a mug on Aria's table and poured some coffee into it. When you're ready to order some food, let me know. Aria offered a single nod as the waitress left her booth and walked over to another table. Aria took a sip of the coffee. It was the first real food she was having ever since leaving the base a few days ago. Sleeping in the transport pod had taken its toll on her. Although it had been a new experience, Aria didn't like it much. A man in his mid-50s then walked up to Aria's booth and stared at her. You aren't from here. I'm just passing through. Mind if I take a seat? The man asked. It's a free world, Aria muttered. The man sat down opposite her. My name's Wilkerson. Aria nodded without giving her name. She had no interest in leaving a trail for anyone to follow. Sooner or later, General Duncan would find it odd that she was keeping silent and start trying to contact her. When she didn't reply, he would send people to find her. It was inevitable. Are you from around here? Aria asked. Wilkerson smiled, showing his crooked teeth. Born and grown up here in Glendale. I see. You're with one of the factions, aren't you? Aria shrugged. Does it matter? I don't know why you have taken the insignia off your uniform, but if I was to guess, I believe you belong to the United Alliance. Aria's eyes widened. I knew it, Wilkerson grinned. I guess you've seen some of my peers before, am I right? Wilkerson shrugged. You could say so. Aria took another sip of her coffee. She wanted to get rid of this man. He was disturbing her and she didn't like it. Nonetheless, it could also be an opportunity. What can I help you with, Mr. Wilkerson? Don't need to be so formal, miss. Aria grunted. Since you don't want to tell me your name, let me get to the point. Strange things have been happening over Glendale in the last few weeks. What do you mean by strange? By strange, I mean different from the usual things we see around our community. Define different. Strange lights in the sky, flying objects at night, and even strange figures. What kind of figures? Aria asked. I personally haven't seen any, but some of the other folks in town have detected figures running around town. Aria didn't have to guess who the figures were. The Vezat aliens seemed to be taking bold moves by appearing around Glendale. Who do you think those figures are? Wilkerson pointed a finger above. They come from up there. Aria wanted the man to say it. Just then the waitress returned to her booth. Is he bothering you, ma'am? Wilkerson scoffed. I was just having a conversation, Marie. Marie poured some more coffee into Aria's mug. About little green men running around? I would do well to ignore his stories. Then Marie moved away from their table. Aria cast a sympathetic look at Wilkerson. Despite everything, the man was right about something. There were aliens among them. The only thing that bothered Aria was why the Vezat aliens chose to appear in Glendale. Glendale was one of hundreds of small communities that dotted the continent. There didn't seem to be anything of significance here. I just wanted to warn you, Wilkerson said and left her booth. Aria was relieved to have some privacy again. She looked around the restaurant before picking up the menu. She then raised her hand and placed an order with Marie. Once the steaming food arrived, Aria dug into it with gusto. Chapter 13, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. Private Santiago sat in the officer's quarters and stared at his console. Killing Callum had come easily to him, easier than he had anticipated. Growing up, Santiago had been the model student in school and then in the academy. He never got into fights or arguments with anyone. His focus had always been on studying and improving himself. He always avoided joining groups and debates. It was not his interest then. Could he have ever imagined killing another human being years later? No, he couldn't. And yet he had done it. When he chose to sign up and join Martin and help the aliens, he never thought he'd be put in a position of killing someone. Martin had never mentioned it and it hadn't crossed Santiago's mind. He had been too naive. After all, he was working with aliens who wouldn't hesitate to kill a human. Nonetheless, what was done was done. When he had heard of the base lockdown, Santiago had grimaced. It meant only one thing. General Duncan had somehow figured out that Callum had been murdered by someone. Santiago's anxiety had upped a notch. Discovering a murder didn't mean that they would find the killer. Santiago had been extremely cautious to wipe away his own tracks. But once he had returned to his quarters last night, he had realized he had forgotten one thing. He hadn't wiped away the part of dragging Callum's body. That had been a mistake. Santiago suspected his mistake had led to the base lockdown. Now, all he could do was wait it out and pretend to continue doing his work. There was a knock at his door. It nearly made Santiago jump out of his skin. His hands trembled ever so slightly. Santiago tried his best to calm down as a junior officer stepped in and passed him a folder. Once the officer left, Santiago heaved a loud sigh of relief. He couldn't afford to be nervous. Not now. Martin had warned him that should he get caught, he would need to take the appropriate action. Santiago didn't want to go to that option. When Martin had briefed him on the option, Santiago had cringed. Surely he couldn't do it. He would try his best to avoid the option. He returned to his work when the comms buzzed. It was General Duncan. Santiago swallowed hard. Why was the general calling him now? Santiago tried to recall if there was anything that he was supposed to pass to the general. Nothing came to mind. Did the general suspect something? Santiago dismissed the thought and opened the comms. Yes, General. We found some new information. I would like your input on it, Duncan said. Santiago nodded. Yes, sir. I'm sending it over to you now, Duncan said. Affirmative. Santiago found it odd why the general didn't come over to his quarters and give it to him personally. Maybe the general was busy. That could be it. Santiago hoped so. He had also not seen Captain Aria around for a few days. He wasn't sure what had happened, but there had been a few rumors circulating around the base. One of those rumors had indicated that Aria had got in the line of fire with the general and had been given a leave of absence. Another rumor stated that she had quit her command. Neither of those rumors seemed likely, at least in Santiago's opinion. Nonetheless, something was going on with Captain Aria. An alert popped up at Santiago's console, pulling him back into reality. He detected a file and clicked on it. An image appeared and made his blood run cold. It was an image of a set of lines in the ground. We found these symbols on the ground behind a storage building, Duncan announced. And you need me to decipher them? Duncan nodded. One more thing. These markings were found on our base. We believe they were put there last night around midnight. Keep this confidential. Santiago nodded and the comms ended. His hands were now shaking. How had these markings appeared behind a storage building? Was it the same one where he had dragged Callum's body to and killed him? It couldn't be. But the appearance of the markings on another storage building from last night was more than a coincidence. Something was wrong here. Had a Vezat alien also been around when he had killed Callum? A darker thought entered Santiago's mind. Was Martin trying to double-cross him? But that didn't make any sense. Martin needed him to spy on the activities of this United Alliance base. If Santiago wasn't here, the Vezat aliens would have no eyes on this base. Santiago flicked his attention back to the markings. Some of them appeared like those he had studied before, and yet some looked different. Santiago scratched his head. He didn't understand what was going on here. Then again, all he had to do was decipher the markings and report back to General Duncan. However, something was eating away at him, the storage building. Why had the general mentioned the storage building? That was what had triggered Santiago's anxiety. He studied the image closely to determine whether the storage building was the same one where he had been last night. Unfortunately, there was no evidence to prove nor disprove it. Santiago sighed. He got to his feet. He had to find out. But his thoughts screamed in protest. It was dangerous to head out to the storage building in broad daylight. Santiago wrestled with his thoughts. He couldn't sit around and not know. He walked out of his room and headed down the corridor. He passed another officer along the way and forced a smile. Stepping out of the building, Santiago flicked his eyes about. At this time of the afternoon, he didn't see anyone. He slowly made his way towards the storage building where he had first met Callum. He again looked around, his hand on his weapon. Santiago retraced his steps to the point where he had dragged Callum's body. That part of the ground had no signs of the dragging. It had been removed. Santiago's body stiffened. He needed to get out of here. A voice boomed from behind him. I wouldn't make any sudden moves. Chapter 14, Lucas's home, Arcadia. Lucas inserted the device into his console and leaned back in his chair. A few clicks later, a folder opened on his display. Inside the folder were a few files. That was a surprise. Lucas narrowed his eyes. One of the files was a video. Lucas didn't hesitate as he clicked on the video file. It took a few seconds before the video came up on his console. At first, the screen was black. It wasn't too long before his father's face appeared and began to speak. Lucas, I'm glad you received this package of mine. I had prepared for it to be sent to you at a certain date after the Ment Treaty had expired. By now, I will presume you found my documents at the storage facility and know of the clauses that form the Ment Treaty. Lucas paused on the video. He needed a drink. He stood, walked over to the cabin and poured a glass of alcohol. Listening to his father had brought forth the pangs of a headache. Once at the secret cave in the middle of Gibson Desert had been enough for him. But listening again to his father was making things harder. Lucas resumed the video. Now let me explain how I found the Vezat 30 years ago. I was walking along a trail in a forest when I observed an object flying low. At first I thought it was a military aircraft and just ignored it, but I was wrong. The object was different and it dangerously rushed to the surface and crashed ahead of me. Although I didn't see any explosion, I raced towards it thinking I could help any survivors. When I reached the area, I found myself standing at the edge of a small lake. The object had crashed into the waters. That had saved it from complete destruction. Half the object was underneath the waters while the rest jutted out above the surface. I yelled to whoever was in the object, but there was no movement. Then I noticed the strange symbols on the hull of the object. That was when I realized that the object wasn't from Earth. It was from somewhere else. Lucas paused the video again and inhaled a sharp breath. He was still reeling from his father's words that he had come across a crashed alien vessel. Out of random luck, of all the people on this planet, his father had really been fortunate to run into the alien craft. Lucas resumed the video. I tried to swim over to the vessel, but before I could, the door at the top of the vessel opened and something emerged. I say something because it wasn't human. It was an alien being from another planet. That's how I met Sultan, which is the alien's name. With this video was a map of the location where I found the alien vessel. You can use it to retrieve the alien vessel. As for Sultan, I kept him in my secret cave until he escaped, but not before I forced him to sign the Ment Treaty that kept his species from invading Earth. It wasn't easy to force the issue, but even the Vezat aliens have their weaknesses. With that, the video ended. At least Lucas now knew how his father had met the Vezat aliens. The timing of the personal delivery was uncanny, but Lucas would take whatever he could. As usual, his father had kept a little bit of information to himself. Like, how did he force Sultan to sign the Ment Treaty? Lucas sighed, just like his father, to keep playing games. Nevertheless, Lucas picked up the piece of paper. Time to go and find this alien vessel. Chapter 15, Highway 118, Central Plains. Captain Aria finished her plate of food fully satisfied. She then slowly began drinking her next mug of coffee. She had lost count of how many refills Marie had given her. It didn't matter. Aria would leave a good tip for the waitress. Working out in these small communities wasn't easy. Although it was a guaranteed job, there was no progress out here for anyone. Then again, the people who lived in these small communities enjoyed the place for what it was, peaceful and quiet. And being in a close-knit community was a stronger pull factor for the people who chose to settle down in these communities. Aria wasn't sure whether she could join such a community. Maybe it was her need to climb the ladder. Whether in the corporate or military world, it had been instilled in her from a young age, and Aria had never looked back. Until a few days ago, when she had thrown all of it away by believing a Vezat alien instead of a commanding officer. Aria leaned heavily back in the booth. She struggled again with her thoughts. This was going to remain harder than she expected. Aria looked back around the restaurant. A few more locals had walked in. On the other end, she heard a noisy bunch of men and women. Aria narrowed her eyes and recognized the insignia. They belonged to the coalition forces. Aria's body stiffened. She didn't want to deal with them, not now. She had a mission to accomplish. Meeting Cofia was the priority. Nothing could sidetrack her from it. Aria finished drinking her last mug of coffee. She doubted she would get any sleep tonight. As she was about to step out of her boot, a hand touched her shoulder. Why don't you wait a bit longer? Aria looked up as a man let go of her shoulder and sat down opposite her in the booth. The man looked familiar, then things clicked into place. It was Captain Williams. I see that you recognize me, Williams said with a smile. Aria caught a glimpse of Marie looking her way with a worried expression. The waitress was probably wondering why strange men kept disturbing her booth. Captain Williams, right? Williams nodded. And you are Captain Aria. Aria was impressed that the coalition forces captain could remember her name. Marie made her way to the booth and looked at Williams and then Aria. Is this person disturbing you, dear? I'm good, Aria smiled. I know him. Marie then turned to Williams. Coffee? I like that, Williams said. Marie returned with a mug, poured him some coffee, and then left them alone. What are you doing all the way out here? Williams asked. I'm taking a few days off, Aria replied, realizing it was better to be truthful to a certain extent. Whoa. Why? I didn't expect my brother to let you take leave in the middle. Aria cut in. General Duncan is your brother? Oh, I see that he never told you of our connection, huh? Aria shook her head. Despite that, things began to make sense. That explained the awkwardness when she and the general had met Williams at the new United Alliance base. That sounds like my brother Williams' side. He's always a secretive person. Why are you with the coalition forces? Aria blurted out before realizing she shouldn't have said anything. Williams must have seen her expression. Don't feel embarrassed. It's a natural question to ask once you know we are brothers. I can't get into the details right now, but suffice to say, it's a long, complicated family matter. Aria gave a single nod. She also didn't want to know the details. It was none of her business, and she didn't want to talk about General Duncan. What are you doing out here? Williams paused for a long moment. My guys over there are running some tests on some new vessels. We just finished one round and decided to take a break and get some food. You mean you aren't at the base anymore? You're fast. I can see why Duncan brought you along to meet me. I worked hard to get where I am, Aria clarified. Williams raised his hands. I didn't mean anything else by my words. But I don't believe for a second you would come to Glendale on your off days. Why not? It's nice out here. Williams frowned. And very far from your base. There are many other closer places you could choose to visit, but not here. Aria shrugged. Williams pulled out a device from his pocket. Why don't I call General Duncan and ask him instead? No, don't. Williams eyed her. Sounds like you're doing something that no one is supposed to know. Aria frowned. I'm on leave and can do anything I want. Captain Williams was beginning to irritate her. She would be the first to admit that the man was perceptive. Something he shared with General Duncan. Is that so? Look, I can't tell you the details, but I'm doing some work on finding the aliens. Williams said, as he took a sip of his coffee. I figured as much. Aria smiled, hoping that would end Williams' incessant prodding of her reason for being in Glendale. But her hopes were dashed by his next words. Why don't you tell me what you're hiding from my brother? Chapter 16, United Alliance 1 Eastern Plains. General Duncan stared at Private Santiago in disbelief. He had hoped that it wasn't so, but Monroe had convinced Duncan to set a trap for the man. Since Santiago was the only one who had been outside his quarters last night, it was an easy decision. Nonetheless, Duncan took no pleasure in doing that to Santiago. Once Duncan had given his approval to the daring plan, Monroe had jumped into action. Despite all this, Duncan had kept his hopes up that Santiago wasn't the individual who had killed Callum. Nothing in Santiago's records indicated he was the kind of individual capable of murder. His records in the academy were exemplary. Maybe it could have been someone else. After all, Santiago had helped them with the initial alien symbols. He had also identified the signal in the alien vessel. How could this man be a traitor? Santiago, drop your weapon, Monroe ordered, keeping his weapon aimed at the man. 4 other soldiers had surrounded Santiago. There was no way for him to escape. He was trapped. Duncan, Monroe, and the soldiers had remained hidden, waiting for Santiago to show up. At first, as the minutes had passed, Duncan had thought Santiago wasn't the traitor. But all that had changed the moment the man had appeared near the storage building. Even then, Duncan had kept his doubts with him. Maybe Santiago was just taking a walk about this part of the base. It was not uncommon for soldiers to take walks to clear their minds. I was just taking a walk, Santiago said. I don't know what's going on here. Duncan exchanged a look with Monroe and nodded. You killed Callum, Monroe hollered. Santiago's eyes widened. What? I think you're mistaken. I heard that it was a Vezat alien. Monroe scoffed. That's what we wanted people to believe. We intentionally allowed that rumor to spread, but we know it was you. Duncan was impressed with Monroe. The young man was building on his bluff. Although they had no concrete evidence that it was Santiago who had killed Callum, Monroe seemed to believe every word he was saying. Monroe was maturing faster than even Duncan had expected. Captain Aria would be proud of the man. Despite Monroe's accusation, Santiago kept on an innocent expression. Either Santiago was innocent or a brilliant actor. Duncan still clung on to the former. I seriously think there's been a mistake, Santiago shrugged, turning his gaze to Duncan. Duncan began to second-guess everything. Was Santiago telling the truth? Monroe hesitated for a moment. I don't believe you, Santiago. Drop your weapon. I'm dropping it now, Santiago said as he pulled out his weapon and dropped it onto the ground and stood back up. Duncan wanted to say something to Monroe, but he kept quiet. So far, Santiago's actions indicated the man was telling them the truth. He didn't look like a killer. Prior to coming out here, Duncan had also run a background check on Santiago. Everything had come out clean. While Santiago was the first in his family to serve a faction, none of that had alluded to him becoming a traitor. Stay where you are, Monroe said as he motioned the soldiers to approach Santiago. Then, several things happened at once. Santiago pulled out something from behind him and fired it at the soldiers approaching him. Each of the soldiers collapsed to the ground. Santiago then took what looked like an unusual weapon and placed it on his chest. His body disintegrated right in front of Duncan's eyes. Chapter 17, Highway 118, Central Plains. Captain Aria heaved a loud sigh. Williams had her in a corner. She could get up and walk away, but she didn't know if Williams would call General Duncan and tell him about meeting her in Glendale. If he did that, it wouldn't take the general too long to connect the dots. You can trust me, Williams assured her. I'm not like my brother. Aria doubted it. Blood always was thicker than water. Although Aria had grown up as a single child, she never despised the other children who had siblings. Being alone had, in fact, helped Aria grow up stronger. Returning to the issue at hand, Aria suspected there had been a falling out between General Duncan and his brother. That would explain why the man had chosen to join and serve in an opposing faction. If I tell you something, I want something in return, Aria proposed. Like what? The real reason you and your brother are in opposing factions. Williams frowned. I'll think about that part. Aria shrugged. Don't expect anything from me either. Williams placed his device on the table. It would take me only one click of a button to call General Duncan. Why was this coalition forces captain pushing her buttons? Aria frowned. What's your problem? Nothing, Williams said. You may find it hard to believe since we are from opposing factions. But I do want to help you, especially if it's related to the Vezat aliens. I lost a lot of good men and women because of those aliens. For once, the man sounded genuine in his desire to fight the alien species. That alone was enough for Aria. She decided to take a chance with this man. Aria leaned forward, lowered her voice, and explained everything from the beginning. Williams kept a neutral expression as he listened. The man seemed to be a master at keeping his emotions under control. Even when Aria highlighted the part about Captain Cofia not killing her, Williams didn't flinch. After she finished her sharing, she leaned back and crossed her arms. That wasn't too bad, right? Williams smirked. Aria shrugged. I appreciate your honesty, Aria. I don't know if I could have been so honest if I had been in your boots. But don't get rattled. I'm not going to tell anyone what you shared with me. To be honest, my brother's reaction isn't a surprise. He always had this ego on his shoulder. I don't think, Williams cut in. Please let me finish. Aria nodded. What I meant to say is that my brother can be pretty boneheaded at times. And I believe this is one of those times. He should have given you the benefit of the doubt. I sometimes fail to understand my brother's way of thinking. Aria relaxed a bit as she listened to Captain Williams. Now that you know what I'm doing, what do you want? Williams eyed her. I told you I want to help you. I'm going to share a secret with you, but it's not what you think. The coalition forces have built a group of space vessels. Aria's jaw dropped. That's how I felt when my general brought me to their secret facility and put me in charge of the pilots, Williams said, nudging his head to the table on the other side. Those guys are some of the pilots. I've also heard that United Alliance pilots will be joining us, but not just yet. Oh, see, I'm not a bad guy, Aria, Williams smiled. Are you going to call General Duncan, Aria asked. Williams scoffed. Of course not. He decided to take you off the alien case, and he will have to deal with the consequences. Duncan may be my brother, but there are so many things we disagree on. I think you're doing the right thing by helping Captain Cofia. If this female alien wants to help us, we should take up the offer. Aria raised her eyebrows. What do you want? Didn't I tell you I'm here to help fight the aliens? Do you want the position of the alien base? William shook his head. I'm not here for that. But I thought you wanted to help us. I do, but I also trust you to do what you need to do, Williams said. I propose the following. You go ahead with your plans, and once you are inside the base, you call us for backup. I'll get a few space vessels to provide cover and help in your escape. Aria couldn't believe the offer that the coalition forces captain was making to her. Don't look so surprised, Williams smirked. I'm not my brother. I operate differently, and these precarious times require it from all of us. All right, I agree to your proposal, Aria said. It's time then to make that call to my brother. What? I want him to know that you're working with me. Wait, General Duncan will be furious, Aria protested. That's his problem. I want to keep this official so you don't get into any more trouble with him. But he's going to go ballistic on me. It's either that or we keep everything a secret. Sooner or later he'll find out the truth, right? Then what are you going to do about it? Experience has told me to just get it out of the way. Aria's lips let go of a loud sigh. By default, she had consented to talking to General Duncan. Chapter 18, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. Duncan stepped into Private Santiago's workspace. Monroe was beside him. The man looked tired. He hadn't expected Santiago to kill 4 soldiers and take his own life. Duncan had also been stunned by Santiago's last action. What are we looking for here, sir? Any evidence of who Santiago was communicating with, Duncan replied. Do you think he would have left anything for us, Monroe asked. I doubted Santiago was planning on killing himself when we went out to the storage building. Start searching. I'll start on the right section. Duncan went to the right part of the room while Monroe began on the left. To begin with, it wasn't a big room. Duncan opened some cabinets against the right wall. A few of the cabinets were full of old files and loose papers. Santiago wasn't as disciplined a person as Duncan had thought. As if on cue, Monroe blurted out, How does Santiago find anything on his desk? Duncan suppressed a chuckle. His own desk was immaculate, but that's because he had stuffed a lot of things in drawers and cabinets. After searching for another 20 minutes, Duncan stepped back with a frown. He had found nothing. Did you find anything? Duncan asked. Nothing, sir, Monroe replied, his tone full of disappointment. Duncan frowned. He had hoped that Santiago would have left something behind, but the man had been disciplined in taking his secrets to the grave. We should leave, Duncan said. Monroe nodded and they left the room. Monroe walked away while Duncan slowly strolled back to his office. Reaching his office, he stepped in, grabbed a drink and sat down at his desk. At least the traitor had been neutralized. Yet the fact that a traitor had been inside the base had left a bitter taste in Duncan's mouth. He opened his console and went to the folder with all his personnel. He opened Private Santiago's details and clicked through the documents. Although he had gone through the files, Duncan wanted to do another round of checks. Maybe he had missed something. After a few minutes, Duncan leaned back in his chair. There was nothing inside the documents that indicated the man would end up becoming a traitor. Duncan drummed his fingers on his desk. It meant only one thing. When Santiago had been sent to his base, the man had been clean. Someone had gotten to Santiago in the past year. It was the only thing that Duncan could conclude. The question remained who had gotten to Santiago. His gaze fell on Santiago's home address. Maybe it was time to send Monroe to investigate further. He pressed on his device, and a few minutes later Monroe stepped inside. "I have a mission for you," Duncan announced. Monroe nodded. "I want you to go to Santiago's home and find out a bit more about him. Talk to the people there and let's see if we can find any links." Monroe arched his eyebrows. "You believe he was turned by someone?" "Find that person and we may find out about the humans helping the Vezat." "I'll do my best, sir," Monroe said and left his office. Duncan's device buzzed. He was getting a call from an unknown number. He picked it up and his brother's voice flooded his ears. "Brother, I was thinking you weren't going to pick up my call." Duncan grunted. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways," William said. "But I'm not calling you to have a chat. I have a new friend here with me who's helping me find the Vezat. Isn't that right, Captain Aria?" Duncan clenched his jaw. Chapter 19, Highway 30, Eastern Plains. Lucas glanced out of his transport pod from the back seat. His driver navigated the transport pod along the quieter highway. Lucas hadn't been on this highway before, or maybe he had when he was very young. Lucas couldn't remember anything about this highway. It didn't matter. "How far away are we from the location?" Lucas asked. "Another 10 minutes, sir," the driver replied. The driver was part of the security detail. Behind his transport pod was another one filled with several armed men and women. The head of the security detail had been reluctant to let Lucas head out here into the wilderness on his own. One of the reasons was because certain stretches of this highway were lonely and twisted through canyons and steep inclines. From a security perspective, Lucas understood the concerns. Nonetheless, this was where his father's map pointed to, and Lucas was going to find the sunken alien vessel, if it even existed after 30 years. Somehow Lucas felt the alien vessel must have disintegrated after all these years. But he had to confirm that theory with his own eyes. Lucas tended not to trust people. Chalk it up to growing up in the Ment family. Everyone always wanted something from him. It was hard to let down his guard. Lucas had learned it the hard way when he was in school. Friends or supposed friends had gotten close to him because of his family name. In those days, Lucas had hated his family name. However, over time, he had learned the power for good behind his family name. Once Lucas realized it, things began to change for him. "Sir, we are reaching the position," the driver announced. Lucas turned away from the past and looked out the window of the transport pod as it turned into a parking lot. A wooded area beckoned him. Once the driver switched off the engine, Lucas sat and waited for the other transport pod to arrive. He was itching to jump out of his transport pod, but he needed to follow the security protocol. Chris was a stickler for it. A few seconds later, the security detail transport pod parked beside his one and the men and women jumped out of it. Chris began barking orders and the security did a quick recon of the area. A minute later, Chris came over and tapped on the side window. It was clear. Lucas stepped out of the transport pod and stretched his body. He stood for a moment, breathing in the clean, fresh air. It was so different here from Gibson Desert. He understood now why his father chose to walk around these woods. Chris turned to him. "Sir, which trail are we walking down?" Lucas pulled out the map and studied it again. He then pointed to the trail on the far left, that one. Chris nodded as Lucas began walking towards the trail. One of the security detail personnel walked in front of Lucas while two more took the rear. As Lucas walked slowly down the trail, he flicked his eyes about the trees. It was quiet. He liked it. As Lucas continued his descent along the trail, he caught his first glimpse of a lake. It was a small lake. Lucas looked back down at the map and realized the position indicated on it was in the middle of the lake, just like his father had told him. As the trail wound down, it came up beside the lake. Lucas stopped at the edge of the small lake. Chris came up to him. "Sir, is this the location?" Yes, Lucas replied. Where is it? Chris asked. According to the map, we need to walk to the other side of the lake. A few minutes later, Lucas stopped at the other side of the lake. His eyes scanned the area and he detected something jutting out of the center of the lake. It had to be the alien vessel his father had described. I see it. Chris followed his gaze and nodded. What do you want to do? Call in the salvage crew, Lucas replied. It was time to lift the wreckage out of the lake. Chapter 20, Highway 118, Central Plains. Captain Aria wore a horrified expression as she listened to Captain Williams mention her over the phone to General Duncan. At first, there was a silence that stretched for an uncomfortable and awkward few seconds. Williams, are you drunk? Duncan hollered. Aria had been expecting the call to be bad, but the way Williams started the conversation was something she had never expected. It was far worse. It appeared that Williams liked saying things to his brother to elicit a reaction. Maybe that was a sibling rivalry thing. Aria couldn't tell. She chose to remain silent and let things play out. I'm serious, bro, Williams insisted. I'm in a restaurant, sitting in a booth across from Captain Aria. I don't believe you, Duncan scoffed. Williams motioned to Aria. He wanted her to say a few words. Aria shook her head. She didn't want to get in the middle of this conversation. From the beginning, she had been against Captain Williams calling General Duncan. If she spoke, it would only make things worse than it already was. Williams gave Aria a pointed look. Looks like your captain's a bit shy. Or you're lying to me, Duncan scowled. I don't have time for your nonsense. What do you want? Williams gave Aria a signal that she didn't need to figure out. It was a warning. Either she would need to say something or Williams would reveal her secret. He then pushed the device towards her. Aria suppressed a sigh. She hated being forced into a corner. She wished she hadn't stepped into this restaurant. She wished she hadn't been hungry. Marie was looking at her again. The woman sported a concerned look. Aria was appreciative that someone was worried for her. Unlike Captain Williams, who seemed to be enjoying this whole conversation a bit too much. Sir, it's me, Aria said softly. What? Duncan admitted. Williams took the device back. I told you, brother, I'm disappointed that you thought I was lying to you. We are brothers. You of all people should know me better than anyone else. Don't go there, Williams, Duncan warned. Aria leaned back into her side of the booth, hoping that this conversation would end sooner than later. She didn't even want to imagine what General Duncan must be thinking of her. He probably would think she had betrayed the United Alliance. But then again, there was a ceasefire in place between the United Alliance and the coalition forces. And the two factions were supposed to be collaborating to defeat the common enemy. Aria was being naive, trying to come up with an effective excuse. She was supposed to be on leave. She also hadn't gotten any permission from General Duncan to work with the coalition forces. I don't know what's going on here, Duncan growled. What did you tell Captain Aria? Nothing, Williams replied curtly. Williams, stop avoiding my question, Duncan insisted. All I'm saying is that Captain Aria is willing to help me, and I wanted to call you and inform you of that. Do you have a problem with it? I could always call General Style and he could have... Duncan interrupted Williams. I got your point. Aria couldn't believe that Duncan was giving in to his brother's scheme. She never expected such an outcome from the conversation, but she had to admit that Williams had a distinct but offensive way of getting under the skin of people. Despite being a coalition forces captain, Williams was not his brother. Far from it. It was interesting to note how different the two brothers were. I would also request you keep Captain Aria from harm's way, Duncan said. Williams looked at her and winked. I think Aria can handle herself quite well. Isn't that true, brother? Duncan grunted. Aria, once you're finished helping Captain Williams, report back to the base. Williams stretched the device towards her. Yes, sir. That was all Aria could say. She dared not say anything else. Williams laughed. What's so funny? Duncan growled. Nothing, brother, Williams replied. I have to go now. Wait, Duncan's voice trailed off. Williams ended the call and looked at Aria. That wasn't so difficult, right? Aria kept silent. At least now you don't need to work with me secretly. General Duncan has given his blessing. Aria cocked her head. I didn't hear that part. Really? Williams smirked. Yeah. My brother may have not said it explicitly, but it's implied, Williams clarified. I see. Good, then we should get down to work. General Duncan won't let this simply go, Aria admitted. Williams frowned. I don't care much for what my brother will do. We need to focus on the Vezat aliens. Aria offered a single nod. Although it would be hard to keep her thoughts away from General Duncan, Captain Williams was right. The enemy in front of them wasn't going to be easy to neutralize. A lot of effort would be needed, and much sacrifice. I have one last question, Aria said. Shoot. Why didn't you tell him about my meeting with Cofia? Williams leaned back with a grin. I'm not here to drive a wedge between you and Duncan. If I wanted to do that, there are many other colorful ways I could have gone about it. The reason I didn't tell him is because I want to build a bit of trust between us. Aria pursed her lips. Trust? We both know that our factions have been enemies for a long time, Williams said. And I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be easy working together. Do you see that table of men and women? Yeah. Well, they hate the United Alliance. They lost many of their friends in the war, and none of them would shed a tear for you if they gunned you down. Aria's blood ran cold. And you still want to work with me? Williams nodded. I'm not at war with you. The alien species is our enemy. We all need to get that straight in our heads. If we believe we are still fighting each other, then the Vezat will win, invade Earth, and achieve their mission. We don't even know their endgame, Aria counted. Not yet, but I hope your new friend will help enlighten us. Aria frowned. Captain Cofia wasn't a friend, but she wasn't the enemy either. Aria didn't know where that put the female alien. In the end, it didn't matter. If Cofia could help free the humans and destroy the Vezat base, that would be sufficient. Chapter 21, Arcadia, Eastern Plains. Sergeant Monroe pulled his transport pod into the public car park at the center of Arcadia. Arcadia was different from the small towns that neighbored the United Alliance base. In fact, Monroe had taken several hours to drive over. Along the way, he had made multiple stops. Driving a longer distance had been refreshing for Monroe. For this mission, he had gotten permission from General Duncan for Sergeant Ramos to join him. Monroe had heard that Ramos had driven the general to the site of the downed alien vessel. During their drive, Monroe had listened as Ramos had explained finding the alien vessel wreckage in the small lake off Highway 30. All of it made him excited. I still can't believe Santiago ended up killing himself, Ramos said. It shocked me too. I expected Santiago to surrender to us. I was planning on interrogating him. In fact, Monroe had been looking forward to breaking down Private Santiago, but all that had gone up in smoke when Santiago had taken his own life. So, the general thinks someone turned Santiago against us? He seems pretty convinced by it. Ramos lifted a single eyebrow. But you aren't? Monroe shrugged. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how Santiago could do that to us. I get it. If Santiago could be turned, it could happen to any one of us. Monroe interjected, but it wasn't any one of us. Except Santiago. Did you know him? Ramos shook his head. I ran into him a few times, but I wasn't friends with him. I think Santiago kept to himself. I did see him around the mess hall eating alone, but he always had a device in front of him. He was like a geek. Ramos's words confirmed Monroe's fears. Santiago had no friends. Was that why he had been picked by someone? It was a possibility Monroe couldn't deny. Yet it opened another question. How had that someone been able to zoom in on Santiago from amongst the many soldiers on the base? That was a scary part of it all. Nonetheless, on the general's orders, Monroe had gone through the base looking for anyone who had been close to Santiago. But his search had been in vain. That should have been a red flag, but no one had noticed it. Santiago had been intelligent enough to keep a low profile and do his duties. It didn't mean that every loner was a security risk. Every person was different with their own strengths and weaknesses. We better get going, Monroe admitted. He then stepped out of the transport pod. Several local folks nodded at him and Monroe returned the smile. This isn't a small town, Ramos observed. No, it's a bigger place. Aren't we supposed to head to Santiago's home? Ramos asked. Not yet. Monroe intentionally chose not to go directly to Santiago's home, in case someone was observing Santiago's home. According to the record, Santiago stayed with his parents, which wasn't unusual. Having a separate home would have been costly since someone like Santiago spent most of his time on the base. Even Monroe didn't have his own place. In the future, he planned to get a home, but not right now, especially since they were in the middle of a conflict. I want to talk to the local folks and see if they know him, Monroe offered, knowing it was a long shot. Ramos gave a single nod as Monroe led them to the local coffee shop. They stepped inside and the smell of coffee attacked their senses. A few minutes later, Monroe was seated with Ramos sipping a coffee. The coffee is pretty good here, Ramos mused. Better than that back on the base, right? Ramos grinned. The food on the United Alliance base wasn't that fantastic to begin with. It had taken Monroe a few weeks to get adjusted to it. Eventually he got used to the food. It became second nature. He suspected his taste buds had just adjusted themselves. Monroe then stood and walked over to the young, dark-haired female barista at the counter. Hi. Hi there, the woman replied. How can I help you? I'm from the nearby base. The woman smiled. I can see that on your uniform. My name is Julie. Monroe's cheeks flamed. Oh yeah, my name's Monroe. Nice to meet you, Julie smiled. Anyway, the person I'm looking for is around my age. He's from the base. He lives here with his parents. Don't we all? What's his name? Santiago. Oh yeah, Private Santiago. I know him, Julie replied. You mean you were friends with him? Oh, nothing like that. My older sister used to go to high school with him. And Santiago used to come in here when he was, I guess, on leave from his work at the military. Monroe offered a clumsy nod. He hadn't expected to find someone who knew Santiago so soon, but he was glad he had taken the opportunity to talk to the barrister. Have you seen him around here lately? Monroe asked. Julie nodded. Let me see. I remember him coming in here with someone and the two of them sitting at the corner over there. That was a bit unusual. Monroe's ears perked up. Why was it unusual? Julie leaned over the counter, her eyes glancing around the coffee shop. If you don't mind me saying, Santiago is kind of a loner. Yeah, he's like that back on the base too. Julie shook her head in dismay. Whenever he came in here for his coffee, he would be alone, and he would sit alone and not even look around. His eyes were always on his device. I did try to talk to him on a few occasions, but let's just say our conversations were short. What was different the last time you saw him? I noticed he was talkative with the other man, who I hadn't seen around here before. Monroe frowned. Could this man be the one who had turned Santiago against the United Alliance? Can you describe him? Monroe inquired. Oh, I'm not really good at recalling the details. Monroe pressed his lips into a thin line. Without a description of the man Santiago had been talking to, there would be no way to find out anything. Wait a second, Julie said. We do have video footage, but I'll need to go and check it and send it over to you. It'll take a little while, though. Do you have something I can send the video footage to? Monroe nodded and passed Julie his contact information. You can send it here. Julie then turned to another barrister. Alex, I need to get something for the military. Can you cover me for a while? Alex walked over and nodded. Monroe then returned to his seat. What was all that about? Ramos asked. Monroe shared his conversation with Ramos, whose eyes widened. You really got a lucky break there. Knowing Santiago, I'm even surprised he chose to come to this place at all. I expected him to order his coffee to go and drink it in his car or something. I guess he liked the coffee and the environment over here, Monroe said with a weary smile, as he took another sip of his coffee. Despite that, they had gotten a lucky break. Monroe had kept his expectations low when the general had sent him to Arcadia to find out more information about Santiago. All Monroe could do now was to wait for Julie. Hopefully the video footage would have captured the man Santiago had been talking to. A little while later, Julie came over and signaled to him. Monroe checked his device. He had received the video footage. Ramos leaned forward as Monroe placed his device on the table and played the video. Chapter 22, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. Duncan kept pacing around his office. It had been an hour since he had ended the call with his brother. At the end of the call, Duncan had been furious and full of questions. How on earth did Williams find Aria? It couldn't be by random chance. Duncan didn't believe in such coincidences, and this was an extreme one. It also sounded like Williams and Aria were in a restaurant. How did that come about? Did Aria go and contact his brother? Highly unlikely. Aria would have no way to find Williams. She had no contacts within the coalition forces. Duncan knew Aria. She hated the coalition forces. He recalled her telling him that during the interview, what had stood out for him in that interview had been the raw emotion in her voice. Duncan believed then that Aria had lost someone close due to the coalition forces. It made sense. Nonetheless, Duncan couldn't dismiss the call he had just had with his brother. Williams had enjoyed teasing him during the call. Williams always liked to do that to him. Every time Williams returned from a hike with their father, his brother would be all over him, telling him about the fun things they had done. Duncan had been wise to know that Williams wanted to get a reaction out of him. Sometimes Duncan just let it out, but those were rare times. In most cases, Duncan kept it all inside of him. What was the point of arguing with Williams? But today was different. Williams had gone out of his way to push Duncan's buttons. The fact that Aria had listened to it all only made matters worse. Aria should have stopped it, but she didn't. Maybe that had to do more with their last conversation. Duncan had been quite clear in shutting her down. Duncan sighed. He hadn't listened to her. Something he often thought was important for any commanding officer. Maybe he should have given Aria the benefit of the doubt. Why had he been so quick to judge her? It was unlike him to do that. Maybe the Vezat aliens and all the death they had caused to humanity was getting to him. Duncan knew better. He needed to be better than that. Which brought him to the next question that kept nagging at him. What was Aria doing far from the United Alliance base? He had expected her to go home and rest, but it was obvious she had chosen to do something else. Had she defied his orders and gone and met the female alien? Duncan frowned. Aria wasn't the kind of individual who would risk her entire military career on doing such a thing. Not a chance. Nonetheless, Duncan wasn't convinced. He understood these were precarious times and required different responses. Still, going to meet the enemy alien was a big gamble. If Aria had done it, she had just thrown away her entire military career. That would be unfortunate and a big loss for the United Alliance. Aria had the potential to rise higher up the ranks. He stopped pacing and sat back down. He was tired from all the overthinking. He could make a call to Aria and find out what the heck was going on. But he didn't want to do that. His stubborn pride wouldn't allow it. Maybe Aria would call him. Duncan heaved a loud sigh and checked his console. He had wasted over half an hour thinking about his conversation with his brother. He needed to get his attention back on the Vezat aliens. Then his device buzzed. One of the sensors at the alien vessel's wreckage had been triggered. Someone was there. Chapter 23, Off Highway 30 Eastern Plains. Lucas watched as his salvage crew positioned their boat at the center of the lake. He had chosen not to engage in any external salvage company, but instead get his own people to lift the wreckage out of the lake. It was too risky to bring in any external people on site because there would be too many queries, none of which he wanted to respond to. Chris was standing beside him. They'll need to be delicate in handling the wreckage. Lucas agreed. He didn't want the alien vessel breaking apart when it was lifted out of the waters. That would work against his plan. Lucas wanted to retrieve the alien vessel intact and take it back to his warehouse, where it would be carefully studied. He suspected the alien vessel held more secrets behind the men treaty. Have they all agreed to not talk about what they are seeing today? Lucas asked. Yes, sir, Chris replied. They all signed the necessary documents. Even though these were Lucas's employees, he wasn't taking a chance. Times had changed. People found it hard to keep a secret. Everybody wanted to share or say something. What do you expect to find inside? Chris asked. Dead aliens and their technology, Lucas replied firmly. Chris jerked his head back. Dead aliens after all these years? I believe one alien was alive, but there could have been others who died at the point of impact, Lucas explained. Based on his father's message, he had met one alien. That implied one alien had survived the crash landing. Despite that, Lucas doubted that the vessel had contained only a single alien. A vessel sent to Earth would have had more than one alien. The still waters of the small lake didn't know what was about to open. Getting the boat into the lake had been another drawn-out saga. Lucas's people had been able to identify a dirt road that led to the small lake from the other end. Once that had been found, his people had driven a truck, pulling a boat and launched it into the small lake. Since a small part of the alien vessel jutted out at the center of the lake, the salvage crew didn't need to spend a lot of time finding the wreckage. Despite that, the salvage crew had sent underwater drones and divers to ascertain the size of the alien vessel. That would be important information before any lifting was done. I think they're about to begin, Chris announced. Lucas turned his gaze away from his device and looked towards the center of the lake. The salvage crew divers had resurfaced, signaling the hooks and cables were in place to pull the wreckage out of the water. It was going to be a delicate operation. Lucas had demanded that he wanted the alien vessel in one piece, not multiple pieces. A broken alien vessel would do him no good. As the engine of the boat thrummed, steel cables stretched taut from twin winches mounted on its deck. The lifting process had begun. It was time to awaken the alien vessel wreckage. The winches clicked forward inch by inch, groaning under the strain. Lucas' eyes were locked with the boat as he watched in anticipation. He was about to pull out an alien vessel from the past. No one had done that before him. A whirl of bubbles began to form on the surface, rising in a frenzied churn as the alien vessel beneath the dark waters stirred. The cable snapped tighter as a shadow emerged from the waters. The lake hissed as it parted, and the secret it had kept for 30 years began to arise. A sleek, silver-looking hull broke the surface. Surprising, the hull of the vessel was intact and smooth. It appeared that 30 years in the dark waters hadn't damaged the vessel. It seemed unmarred by rust and decay. Probably had more to do with the alien technology that had created the vessel. Lucas caught sight of the strange symbols along the hull. The vessel was different from the one he had flown over the desert. It was smaller. While its hull was shiny, it appeared to be an older model. That would make sense as 30 years had passed since the vessel's last flight. The boat rocked as the wreckage rose, water washing off its sides. The crew on the boat kept at it without flinching. Then one of the cables snapped. "Whoa," Chris said. To Lucas's relief, the broken cable narrowly missed one of the crew. Despite that, the wreckage was lifted onto the boat. Then the crew slowly dropped it onto the deck. Lucas had been worried that the boat might have sunk with the alien vessel, but it didn't. The crew quickly then began moving to the shoreline. Lucas walked over with Chris to the location. The lake's surface, which had been untouched for years, was now full of ripples. "What do you want to do with it?" Chris asked. "I want to open the vessel door first," Lucas replied as he walked over to the vessel and jumped on its deck. He couldn't wait until the vessel was in its warehouse. Lucas strolled to the only door and motioned to one of the crew, "Open it." The crew member took a crowbar and pulled on the door. At first nothing happened. Then the crew member put in more effort and the door groaned as it opened. "Step aside," Lucas said. He then walked towards the open door and peered inside. A small corridor extended to the cockpit. There were no compartments. This vessel had been made for a short journey. "I'm going in," Lucas announced. He then crawled into the musty air of the vessel. He was probably the first person ever to step into this vessel. He carefully got to his feet and made his way to the cockpit. As he had expected, 2 alien bodies lay inside. But there were 3 seats. That was all he wanted to know. Chapter 24, Arcadia, Eastern Plains. Monroe studied the man seen talking to Private Santiago. The blonde-haired man looked slightly older than Santiago. Other than that, there was nothing unusual about him. The conversation between the 2 men seemed quite intense. Unfortunately, the video footage didn't have any audio. "Do you think it's him?" Ramos asked. "I think so. Let me run an identification on him." Monroe grabbed the image and searched through the database for any matches. It took a while before a match appeared. "I got it. His name is Martin Sorensen, And the man lives here in Arcadia. Whoa, Ramos whistled. We got lucky again. Monroe grinned. They had gotten another breakthrough. But the fact that Julie didn't recognize him when Martin has been keeping a low profile in Arcadia, Ramos mused. Ramos' assessment was on point. Martin had been intentionally not visiting the coffee shop or other popular places. In this instance, Martin had broken his own protocols and visited the coffee shop with Santiago. That had been his first mistake. Monroe nodded. I'm checking for his residential address. Got it, let's go. Monroe got to his feet, waved at Julie, and they left the coffee shop. He then submitted a transmission to General Duncan, updating him on the new lead. The general didn't reply. Monroe assumed the man was busy. Do we need to wait for the general? Ramos asked as they walked towards their transport pod. Negative, Monroe replied. We better get to this location and see whether Martin is around. I'm also going to call in some reinforcements. Monroe wasn't taking any chances. If Martin Sorensen turned out to be the person who had convinced Private Santiago to betray the United Alliance, then Martin would be considered dangerous. Stepping into the transport pod, Monroe pulled out of the parking lot, and they were soon on their way through one of the neighborhoods that formed part of Arcadia. The neighborhood appeared to be a quiet one. There was no one visible on the road. Monroe passed Martin's home and stopped the transport pod 2 houses away. Martin's place is 2 homes behind us. I asked the reinforcement to stand by at the next block of homes for now. I don't want to scare this guy off. Ramos nodded as they slowly approached Martin's home. At first, Monroe had considered entering the home from the backyard, but then he changed his mind. That would be a backup if he felt something was suspicious. Monroe led Ramos to the front door. His eyes scanned the front windows. The curtains were drawn. A voice boomed from the left. Hello there. Monroe turned only to face an older woman seated in a corner of the front lawn with a data pad in her hands. Hello, Monroe said. Are you looking for my son Martin? The older woman asked. Ramos took charge. Yes, Mrs. Sorensen. You can call me Martha. Martha smirked. Ramos nodded. Of course, Martha. We're supposed to meet Martin today. We thought we'd drop by and surprise him. A surprise, Martha said. What a wonderful idea, although my boy doesn't really like surprises. I learned that the hard way as we threw a surprise birthday party for him when he was 12. Do you know whether Martin's inside? Ramos asked. Martin came back yesterday from his business trip, Martha replied. He always goes on extended business trips. Says it's part of the job and he loves it. I don't like him disappearing for days and weeks. Anyway, he's not home right now. He went out to get some food. You're welcome to sit inside and wait for him. Monroe exchanged a look with Ramos. Thank you, Martha, but we'll wait for him in our transport pod. Whatever suits you, Martha said and went back to her data pad. Monroe then gestured to Ramos. Come on. They turned back and headed down to the sidewalk. Ramos leaned in. What if Martha warns Martin? That's a risk we're going to have to take, Monroe replied. But from our conversation with Martha, she has no clue what Martin is up to in those supposed business trips. Monroe kept walking until they reached the transport pod. Ramos hesitated. Are we going to get inside? I think let's wait out here a bit longer, Monroe replied as he leaned against the transport pod. As he pulled out a device, Ramos nudged him. Is that him? Martin turned his head as the transport pod passed him and drove down the road. He narrowed his eyes. The transport pod slowed down and turned into Martin's home. That had to be him. It came to a stop. That should be him, Monroe mused. Let's give him a second to get out of the transport pod. Monroe had no plans of chasing the transport pod down the road. It would be too dangerous and cause a commotion in the neighborhood. The easiest thing was to apprehend Martin and take him in. A figure opened the door and stepped out of the transport pod. Monroe recognized the figure from the video footage from the coffee shop. Martin, do we go now? Ramos asked. Monroe shook his head. Ramos was itching to get into the action, but Monroe had learned his lesson from the incident with Mr. Griffith and the Vezat aliens. Calculated steps were needed, not impulsive actions. Even though they were dealing with a human, he was as dangerous as the alien species. Martin walked up to the door and turned to his mother. He was talking to her about something. She would tell him of their visit, no doubt about it. The woman looked animated as she spoke. No time to wait. Start walking now, Monroe directed. Martin kept talking, and in an instant his posture changed. Monroe realized that Martin had figured it out. The man turned and looked in their direction. Monroe's eyes locked with the man. Martin bolted down the road. Chapter 25, Highway 118, Central Plains. Aria was back in a transport pod driving towards the position that Captain Cofia had given her. She had another hour before she reached the position. Back at Glendale, Aria had parted with Captain Williams and his pilots. Williams had done the awkward thing of introducing her to each of his pilots. The pilots had shaken her hands, but Aria wasn't a fool. As Williams had mentioned, these pilots saw her as the enemy. Although a few of them did try to be genuine with her, it was a struggle for them. She could sense it from some of their body postures. But all that would now need to take a back seat to the Vezat aliens. Whatever emotions Williams' pilots harbored against the United Alliance wouldn't help them now. Williams had then informed his pilots that Aria would be helping them find the Vezat base. A few of the pilots had been surprised, which was a good thing. As Aria had left them, a few had waved to her. Maybe the distrust between the two factions was starting to thaw. She hoped so. To have any success against the Vezat menace, the two factions needed to unite and work together. Any form of distrust could derail everything. Nonetheless, Aria was glad to be away from Captain Williams and his pilots. She would be the first to admit that she had also been uncomfortable with them. Even though Williams seemed genuine in his proposal, she had to be realistic, as she was dealing with an enemy faction. Then the comms on her device made a buzz. Aria looked at her device and sighed. It was General Duncan. She had expected a call from him, but she had hoped it wouldn't be today. At first, Aria ignored the buzz. She didn't want to deal with him. Eventually, she pulled her transport pod to the side of the road and picked up the comms. Aria, yes, sir. What the heck are you doing? Duncan demanded. If she had hoped that General Duncan would take the easier approach, that hope had faded with the anger lining his voice. Sir, I just ran into Captain Williams. I don't believe you, Captain. Your behavior isn't fitting for a United Alliance captain. Aria tightened her jaw. Sir, if I may speak freely. Silence. Aria continued. Then I don't think there's anything to talk about. I'm on leave and you approved it. That doesn't mean you can go gallivanting around and join together with the coalition forces. I thought we were supposed to work together, Aria protested. Not like this. You need to follow my orders. I told you to rest. I am resting. No, you're not. You're disobeying my orders. Aria tried her best not to be disrespectful to General Duncan. After all, the man had helped her at the base. I am not, sir. I'm only trying. Duncan cut in. I don't need to hear your excuses. You were clearly told to stay away from the Vezat aliens. They are dangerous and are using you to their advantage. Why can't you see that? We have to give them the benefit of the doubt, Aria insisted. Are you going to meet her? Who? Don't play games with me, Captain. Are you planning on meeting Captain Cofia? Aria swallowed hard. I already met her. Silence. I'm disappointed with you. With that, the comms ended. Aria slammed her fist on the console. She had expected the worst and had gotten it. General Duncan wasn't going to change his mind. From all her experience with him, she should have known that. Even then, Aria had clung to the smallest bit of hope. That was gone now, buried deep in the ground. Chapter 26, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Captain Sooty remained stunned with the news he had received from Martin. A few minutes ago, Martin had sent him a transmission from Arcadia. It appeared that there was someone amongst the Vezat who was helping the humans. How did he find out that information? Martin didn't tell him, which made it more frustrating. Sooty closed his eyes. It wasn't possible. None of the Vezat on the base and those hidden in other locations would willingly want to help the humans. None. Not after waiting for 30 years due to that treaty. Sooty felt that Martin must have gotten the wrong information. It was even possible that Martin was being fed disinformation. If that turned out to be true, it meant Martin's spy in the United Alliance base had been compromised. A dangerous possibility. But Sooty couldn't ignore the likelihood that something like that had occurred. However, that theory also had its flaws. Martin had also informed him that his spy was uncontactable. Sooty frowned. Had the spy been neutralized by the humans? Nothing was off the table with humanity. Sooty began to consider everyone in the base. Each of them was loyal to the core. All of them had waited patiently for years, ever since coming to Earth. Why would any of them decide to betray him now? Especially when the Vezat were on the brink of finally executing their mission. It didn't make sense. He needed to talk to someone. He pressed on his device and waited. A little later there was a buzz at his door and Captain Cofia stepped inside. "Captain, take a seat," Sooty said. Cofia was his most trusted and loyal Vezat. She had been faithful in her duties to the Vezat and the Supreme Leader. Sooty felt he could trust her with this information. "What has happened?" Cofia asked. Sooty smiled. It was just like Cofia to anticipate his next few words. Cofia came from a long line of loyalists to the Supreme Leader. Back on the Vezat homeworld, her family line was known to be staunch supporters of the Supreme Leader and his rule. "Martin just gave me a shocking update," Sooty announced. "He says there's a traitor amongst us." Cofia's jaw dropped. "Here?" According to his source at the United Alliance base. "Did the source give a name?" Cofia asked. Sooty shook his head. "Unfortunately, the source has disappeared. Martin's unable to contact him. That makes it hard for us to validate this information." "I concur with your assessment. Humanity is cunning. They could have discovered the source and fed it this information." "What else did Martin say?" "Nothing else," Sooty replied. "I think he was busy with his home affairs. What do you think we should do?" Sooty could sense that Cofia was surprised he was asking her for advice. He often did, but in recent weeks he hadn't come to Cofia for anything. Sooty had been relying more on Martin the last few weeks. He also understood he couldn't just depend on a human. That was risky. Humanity could turn in either direction. Martin wasn't as loyal as Cofia, who had been with Sooty for years. "I suggest we enhance the security around the perimeter," Cofia replied firmly. "A lockdown may be premature until we validate Martin's suspicions." Sooty offered a single nod. "I agree, a lockdown would be too much. Being in this valley has protected us for years. I don't foresee anyone assaulting the base. Thank you for your advice always, Cofia." Sooty watched Cofia leave and then turned his attention back to the console. Something had to be done, but he still wasn't sure of the best course of action. He had waited years for this time, all because of that Ment treaty which had squashed all the Vezat plans. He wasn't going to allow anyone, even a traitor, to derail the plans. If someone was betraying the Vezat, Sooty would neutralize that individual. Chapter 27, Arcadia Eastern Plains. "We need to catch him," Monroe hollered as he sprinted down the road. Ramos was behind him as Martin kept running. The man was fast. As they passed his home and Martha, the woman waved at them in anger. Monroe guessed Martha had been told something false about them. Didn't matter. Their focus was on Martin now. "Stop chasing him," Martha yelled. "My son has done nothing wrong." Monroe ignored her screams as they ran past the home. Martha wouldn't understand, and she would never accept the fact that her son had betrayed humanity. "Faster," Monroe said. He wheeled his legs as he caught sight of Martin reaching an intersection and turning to his left. The man would be familiar with this neighborhood. "I think he's heading to the forest," Ramos said. "We need to stop him before he gets to the forest." Monroe turned left with Ramos. Martin ran into a home and hurdled the fence. He was trying to cut across the home to the forest. Monroe came up to the same fence and jumped over it. A door cracked open. Someone said something, but Monroe ignored it. No time for that. He was now in the backyard of a home. Martin was nowhere to be seen. Monroe sprinted and hurdled the backyard fence. Martin was ahead of him, running down the road to the forest. "I'm going to take a shot at him," Ramos shouted, pulling out his weapon. "Don't," Monroe ordered. "I need him alive." Ramos sighed as he holstered his weapon. The number of homes on either side began to thin. The tree line of the forest loomed ahead of them, but before it was a barbed wire fence. That would slow Martin down. Despite that, Monroe kept running, his breathing ragged. Ramos jabbed a finger ahead. "He's stopping at the fence." Monroe doubted that fence would stop the man. He would find a way over it. Just like he expected, a light began to flash in front of Martin. The man was cutting into the fence. "Come on," Monroe shouted, pulling out his weapon. He aimed it at Martin and fired once, but it missed the man. Monroe fired again. This time his weapon's fire hit the heels of the man, making him stumble to the ground. Martin turned around and fired at them. "Take cover," Monroe said as he dove to one side. Monroe rolled behind a hedge and fired back. By now, several people in the homes around him were peeking out of their windows. Monroe waved at them to stay away. The last thing he wanted was for innocent civilians to get caught in the crossfire. "He's trying to break through the fence," Ramos muttered. Monroe turned his attention back to Martin. The man had his back to them. Monroe didn't hesitate. He sprinted ahead, closing in on him. By now, Martin had been able to create a large enough hole in the fence, enough to crawl through. But before Martin could do that, Monroe jumped on him and grabbed him by the legs. Martin furiously tried to kick him, but his kicks missed their mark. Ramos came up beside Monroe and hit Martin in the head. Martin collapsed to the ground. "Don't worry, I didn't kill him," Ramos said. Monroe wiped the sweat off his brow and got to his feet. He kicked Martin's weapon away from his feet. The man had been a problem, but now they had him. Ramos knelt and restrained the man's legs and hands. "We got him," Ramos said with a smile. "Lift him up and let's take him back," Monroe said. As Ramos lifted the man to his feet, he groaned and opened his eyes. "What are you doing to me?" "Martin Sorensen, you are a traitor and are going to be spending a long time in prison," Monroe said. By now, a small crowd had gathered around a few homes. Monroe waved to them. "The show's over. Please go back to your homes." The crowd began to slowly disperse as Ramos began dragging Martin back towards their transport pod. Monroe opened the comms and 2 military transport pods appeared along the road. Ramos passed Martin to them. "Take him back to the base and keep guard over him," Monroe ordered. "Yes, sir," the soldiers replied in unison. They grabbed Martin and shoved him into the back of one of the transport pods. After a few seconds, the transport pods started their engines and drove out of the neighborhood. Monroe looked forward to interrogating Martin, but the process would be harder than that of Mr. Mullins. Chapter 28, Ment Warehouse 3, Arcadia. Lucas stepped out of his transport pod. After the salvage team had pulled out the wreckage of the alien vessel, Lucas had instructed them to head to the nearest Ment warehouse. Then he had gotten his security detail to drive him there. As he watched the truck drive into the warehouse with a large tarp covering the wreckage, Lucas opened the comms with General Duncan. "Lucas?" Duncan asked. Lucas then shared the finding of the alien vessel in the lake. "Oh, it was you who was there," Duncan said. "Huh?" Duncan explained how Callum had reached out to him and brought him to the lake off Highway 30. Lucas listened in amazement. "Are you saying 2 humans found this wreckage and took some technology from it?" "Yes," Duncan replied, "but it seems like your father beat everyone to it." Lucas pursed his lips together. His father really had a penchant for being at the right place at the right time. "I'll get my team to take it apart and study it. Although it's old, there might be something useful there. Since you have a new vessel, do you want your people to be around when we study this older one?" "It's okay," Duncan said. "You go ahead with the investigation." With that, Lucas ended the comms. It was a small world indeed. His father had encountered the same alien vessel that Eddie and Callum had discovered. It also proved one thing. The Vezat never found the original wreckage. If the Vezat had found it, they would have either destroyed it or taken it away. Lucas didn't understand the reasons for it, but was glad to have a shot at studying the vessel. Somewhere in this alien vessel was the secret to what his father had used to blackmail the Vezat. Lucas could feel it in his bones, and he was excited to begin the investigation. Stepping into the warehouse, a team of engineers from one of his many companies surrounded the wreckage. Lucas walked over to the lead engineer, Gregory. "Sir, how do we want to go about it?" "I want to know who was on this vessel, where did it come from, and what was their plans, and anything else you can find," Lucas said. "Be careful with it. I don't want anything damaged. Is that clear?" Gregory nodded. "We'll get to work immediately, sir." The man then motioned to his team of engineers, and he began explaining the objective of the investigation. Lucas listened for a bit, then walked away and glanced from a distance. This was going to take some time. Chapter 29, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. As Cofia shut the door behind her, leaving Captain Suti on his own, her heart was pounding. She had tried her best to remain calm inside the room, but she didn't know if Stuti had noticed anything. Hopefully not. Pretending to straddle both sides was exhausting. Ever since Cofia began doing it, she felt like she was losing her real self. But she had to hold it together, now more than ever. The time to execute her plan was running out. Soon Cofia wouldn't need to pretend. Once the base was destroyed and the humans set free, Cofia would be free to be who she was. Yet she hadn't thought much about the aftermath. She dismissed the thoughts. So much remained to be accomplished before she could be free from everything. A buzz on her device pulled her back to reality. Captain Aria had reached the designated position. Cofia suppressed a smile. It was time. She walked out of the building and stood looking about. Patrol drones hovered around the base. It was part of Stuti's enhanced security ever since the Men Treaty had expired. Everything was in place as it should be. She checked her device. There was nothing pressing on her schedule that should keep her away from Stuti, at least for now. Cofia expected him to be focused on finding the traitor. Stuti was the kind of individual who didn't like unknown variables. The other thing was that Martin wasn't around. That made it the perfect conditions to implement the plan. If Martin had been around, he would have done something to root out the traitor. Cofia walked towards the back of the compound, passing by a few vessels sitting on their landing pads. A few engineers were working on the vessels. She turned down a narrow passageway and left the vessels and their landing pads. She came to a stop at a storage building beside the fence. No movement caught her eyes. The patrol drones would come back later. She pressed on the panel at the front entrance to the storage building. The keypad clicked under her fingers. A few seconds later, the door opened with a hiss, and Cofia stepped inside. She found herself in a large space with crates stacked on either side. Most of the crates had old equipment they had brought with them from the Vezat homeworld. But she wasn't here for that. She briskly walked to the far wall and pushed aside a few crates. Against the wall was a panel. She pressed on the panel and removed it, revealing a shaft that descended into the darkness. Cofia glanced back at the front door. No movement. She crawled into the shaft and pulled back the panel. Hopefully no one would enter the storage room for the next couple of hours. She kept crawling through the shaft as it curved downwards beneath the high-voltage fence surrounding the base. It had taken her many months to create this shaft. Every night she had come out here and dug it when the rest of the base was mostly asleep. It had been a painstakingly slow operation, but when Cofia had completed it, she had been delighted. The risk of doing it had been high, but Cofia was disciplined. To execute a plan, she needed a way in and out of the base undetected. The other factor helping her was that the storage building had restricted access due to the sensitive old equipment kept inside of it. No random Vezat alien could enter it. Fortunately, Stuti had given Cofia access to every part of the base. As Cofia emerged from the surface, she found herself on the edge of a forest on the southern section of Granite Valley. Cofia scanned the area around her for any signs of a patrol drone. Sometimes the patrol drones did venture beyond the perimeter of the Vezat base. No sign of anything. She then raced towards a tree line and dove behind several bushes. She was breathing hard and her heart was thumping out of her chest. Cofia took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. The darkness began to descend over the skies. It was time to rendezvous with Captain Aria. Chapter 30, United Alliance 1 Eastern Plains. General Duncan looked through the glass into the interrogation room. He was pleased when Monroe and Ramos had returned with Martin Sorensen. He hadn't expected them to be able to find the man and capture him. Sergeant Monroe was beginning to exceed all of Duncan's expectations, and the man reminded him a lot of Captain Aria. Thinking of Aria sent another surge of frustration through Duncan. The call with Aria had left him furious. He couldn't believe Aria had gone behind his back and met up with the female Vezat alien. It was a regrettable action on her part. What had Aria been thinking? It looked like she had been completely deceived by the Vezat aliens. She must have met up with his brother and told him about it. As usual, Williams would have chosen to believe Aria. Unlike him, Williams was always like that, even growing up. He always gave people the benefit of the doubt. But this was different. They were all in the military except under different factions. This wasn't a game. Duncan couldn't understand why Aria and Williams couldn't see it. Were they so misguided in their efforts to defeat the Vezat aliens? It appeared so. The enemy aliens were a serious threat to humanity. No one could take them for granted. Duncan still didn't believe Captain Cofia was genuinely helping humanity. What would be the benefit for her? Why help humanity? Despite that, Duncan had mulled over the change in countenance of Captain Aria. Everything Aria had done up to that fateful day had been near perfect. She was in line to be promoted higher up, no doubt about it. But now that trajectory was over for her. Duncan had chosen not to report her incident to the council, not yet at least. He didn't know why he hesitated. Duncan wanted to first see this whole thing play out. If Captain Cofia was genuine in her desire to overturn the Vezat aliens, the female alien would lead Aria and Williams to the base. The search for all the valleys with the river had turned up too many positions for the United Alliance to check on. It would take weeks to finish the search. Once Duncan realized that, he had told his men and women to postpone the search. He didn't have the resources to divert to the search. It would have to take a back seat. There was a sound and Monroe stepped in. "Sir, Sergeant, you did well to capture this traitor," Duncan said. "Are we ready to begin the interrogation?" Monroe offered a single nod. "What's his background?" Duncan asked. "Martin graduated from college with honors," Monroe replied. "He's some kind of geek, highly intelligent, nothing else much. He doesn't have a current employer. No evidence of any animosity against the factions. His trail disappeared several years ago." "Let's start then," Duncan ordered. Chapter 31, Unknown Position, Granite Valley. Captain Aria had parked her transport pod several miles away from Granite Valley. That was as per Cofia's instructions. She had driven the transport pod down a dirt road and stopped it deep inside a wooded area. Aria had then covered the transport pod to the best of her ability with leaves and branches. It had taken her more time than she had anticipated. By the time she had covered her transport pod, darkness had begun to fall over the skies. Aria was now standing behind some trees in the middle of a forest. Over the last several minutes, she had checked the device repeatedly. It was the right position. She had to learn to be patient. Being on her own with no possibility of calling in reinforcements was new territory for her. They never taught her this in the military academy. Then again, no one would ever mention disobeying direct orders. It was unthinkable. What would her parents think of her situation? Aria dismissed the thought. She didn't want to think of her parents' view on her decision. She was a grown woman who had to make decisions and take the consequences. Simple as that. "You're early," a voice whispered from her right. Aria nearly jumped out of her skin. "I'm sorry to sneak up on you like that," Cofia said. "Force of habit in my line of work." "I understand. I do have an update for you." Aria then explained a meeting with the coalition forces and their intention to provide air support only when she called for them. Cofia seemed pleased. "You're very resourceful." "Do they know of the base's location?" Aria shook her head, knowing the female alien's concerns. "I'll tell them at the right time, but they are on standby. What's the plan?" Despite Cofia giving her the device, she hadn't explained the details of the plan. Cofia motioned to Aria and they sat down on a log. Cofia started going through the details of her plan. It was simple, but hopefully it would work. The cover of darkness would help. "Your captain's suit sounds like someone who isn't going to make things easy," Aria mused. "Especially now that he has been warned of a traitor inside the base," Cofia said. "So we need to move quickly and execute the plan. I don't know how long Stuti will wait until he puts in place stricter checks." "Lead the way," Aria said, and then began following Cofia through the forest. Aria was impressed with Cofia. The female alien took deliberate steps through the forest, stopping every now and then. Aria touched a weapon in a holster and the grenade belt. It was all she had, and Cofia had also been unable to bring out any weapons. A while later, Cofia stopped at the edge of the forest. Aria peered ahead. The top of a fence could be seen. "How far are we into the valley?" "Granite Valley is huge," Cofia replied. "To walk across it could take several days." Aria's jaw dropped. "Several days?" Cofia offered a single nod. "It's a best-case estimate. That was one of the reasons this valley was selected. It also has a large containment field around it." "I didn't notice it when I came here," Aria said. "That's the point." Cofia smirked. We don't want anyone to notice. That's how we have survived here. What are we waiting for? Aria asked. I want to make sure the patrol drones aren't around. Aria's body stiffened. No one had told her about patrol drones. In fact, Cofia hadn't mentioned anything about the defenses around the Vezat base. Aria was going to have to trust a female alien to take her through into the base. It's clear, Cofia announced. Aria hadn't noticed anything to justify that statement, but it didn't matter. Cofia led her out of the forest. Chapter 32, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. Monroe stepped into the interrogation room. This time he ignored the coldness in the room. Two soldiers stood behind at one corner. Martin was in chains, seated at the chair. Monroe did his best to put aside his last interrogation. Everything Monroe had read up on Martin told him this interrogation was going to be different. Martin had his eyes closed. Was he asleep? Monroe doubted it. He tapped on the chair. Martin opened his eyes and offered a menacing smile. I've been waiting for you. The venom in his voice caught Monroe by surprise, but he didn't flinch. No way he was going to give this traitor the satisfaction of making him scared. Why don't you take a seat? Martin asked. Monroe shot him a warning. I'm not the one in chains. Are you sure, Sergeant Monroe? Martin scowled. Monroe's eyes widened briefly before he regained control. Did you think I didn't know who you are? Martin said before nudging his head to the glass window. General Duncan, I hope you're well, hiding behind that glass like a coward. Monroe's heart was pounding. It then dawned on him what was going on. Martin had been using Private Santiago as a spy, so the man knew of the key personnel inside the base. Martin's plan of trying to rattle them wasn't going to work. Monroe placed the palms of his hands on his end of the table. Looks like Private Santiago has been doing your bidding for a while, huh? For a split second, a flicker of fear swept Martin's expression before being replaced by his cold stare. I don't know what you're talking about. Monroe smiled. You think you know about us, but we know about Santiago. Martin scowled. Again, you're wasting your time if you think I'm going to tell you anything. I have all the time in the world, Monroe snorted. Where's the alien base? Martin's eyes widened. Yeah, we know about the Vezat alien base in a valley somewhere around here, Monroe revealed. If you do know about it, why haven't you attacked it? Martin snapped. What makes you think there's no attack happening right now, even as we speak? Martin leaned back in his chair. You're lying. Despite Martin's retort, his eyes told Monroe that he was getting to him. When we destroy the base, we'll let you know, Monroe said with a smile. Even as we speak, a set of vessels are on the way. Martin grimaced. I don't believe you. That isn't my problem, but mark my words. There won't be a base for you to return to. You are the worst of traitors and you'll live the rest of your life in prison. Monroe turned to leave the room. The sound of clanging shackles stopped him. Monroe flicked his eyes back at Martin. Aren't you going to threaten me? Martin demanded. Monroe shrugged. What for? Martin stared at him in disbelief. Santiago's dead. We have you. We have the position of the base. There's nothing more you can tell me. Martin slammed his shackles on the table. You're lying. Watch me, Monroe said and exited the room with a smirk. That had been too much fun, but it had been General Duncan's idea. The general had told him threatening someone like Martin wasn't going to get them anywhere. Even if Martin agreed to tell them something, they could never take him at his word. Martin was a man who had turned his back on humanity and willingly participated in the deaths of humans. This kind of man could never be trusted, no matter what. Monroe didn't have the experience to think of such things but had to defer to General Duncan. Monroe stepped back into the adjacent room. Duncan looked at him. Sergeant, that was a fine bit of work. Look at him. Monroe stepped inside and approached the glass. Martin was squirming in his seat, looking about. We'll move him into a prison cell and then ship him out to a secure facility, Duncan announced. He won't see the light of day for years. Chapter 33, Secure Facility Coalition Forces. Captain Williams had been tracking Aria ever since she had parted ways with him and his pilots. Unbeknown to her, he had slipped a tracker onto her clothes. At first, when he had grabbed her by the shoulder, he had thought she may have noticed his action. To his relief, Aria hadn't before she had departed from them. Captain, what are we waiting for? Josh, one of the pilots asked. I told her I would wait for her to inform me, Williams replied. But then why did you put the tracker on her? In case she decided not to take up my offer. Williams stared at the console in the secure facility. He had been seated there for the last 30 minutes. At first nothing had shown up, but then a moving green dot appeared. Now the green dot stopped moving. It meant Aria had arrived at her designated position or close to it. What's out there? Williams asked. Josh leaned forward to his console and began typing away. It's a series of mountains and valleys, each next to the other. Do we know which valley she stopped at? Williams asked. It appears she stopped at the edge of 2 valleys, Josh replied. Williams smiled. The Vezat alien Captain Cofia was smart enough to ensure no one would easily be able to find the valley. It wouldn't matter if Aria stuck to the agreement. Williams felt she would. Josh pointed at his console. What happened? Williams turned his attention back to the display. The green dot was gone. Where did it go? It's like she just disappeared, Josh said. Do you think she found the tracker and destroyed it? Williams frowned. That was something he'd need to consider. Despite that, he felt it was unlikely. Something else had happened. Had Captain Cofia killed Aria? He hoped not, but then again, there was no way to be sure about anything related to the Vezat aliens. Williams rubbed his chin. What was her last known position? Bringing it up now, sir. Williams studied the stationary green dot. She never stepped into the valley, Josh observed. There must be something jamming her tracker, Williams mused. Maybe even the whole valley. Josh whistled. Some of those valleys stretch for miles. We're dealing with an alien species, Williams reminded the young pilot. Nothing's off the table with them. For all we know, they could have a field covering the entirety of one of those valleys. Josh snapped his fingers, which would make it impossible for our senses to detect them. Williams gave a single nod. That could explain how the Vezat aliens maintained the base for years, right under the noses of all the factions. It left a bitter taste in Williams' mouth. If the Vezat aliens could do that, what was stopping any other alien species from doing the same thing? If she's inside the valley, she may not be able to inform us, right? Williams had thought of that too. He hadn't anticipated this scenario. But he should have known better. Williams suppressed a sigh. If Aria couldn't contact her, how was he going to provide her with the aerial support? He should have thought through the entire plan before letting the United Alliance captain go. Sir, what do we do? Josh asked. We're going to head to our last known position, Williams said. Just you and me. Get the others to be on standby. Affirmative. Williams was in a corner. He had given his word to Captain Aria that he would be there for her. He couldn't let Aria down. Not like this. Chapter 34, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Captain Aria stood inside the damp storage room. She had followed Captain Cofia through a shaft in the ground on the other side of the fence. Aria had been tempted to ask Cofia about the shaft itself, but had kept quiet. It appeared that the shaft had been created by someone. She suspected it had to be Cofia. Aria's heart was pounding as Cofia walked over to the front door and looked at it. She couldn't believe she was inside the alien base. She pulled out her device and looked at it. It wasn't working. She touched it and then shook it. Nothing. The device was dead. There was no way for her to contact Captain Williams. Your device won't work inside the valley, Cofia said. What do you mean? Aria whispered. As I said, we have a containment field across the valley. The whole valley? Cofia nodded. It keeps everything out. No one can detect us. Your device will only work again once you leave this valley. Aria frowned. With no way to contact Captain Williams, he would think she had betrayed him. She suppressed a sigh. She didn't want to have Captain Williams against her, too. After the falling out with General Duncan, Aria had flirted with the thought of joining the coalition forces. To be honest, she didn't think it was likely that Duncan would allow her back in with open arms. He might instead charge her and kick her out of the United Alliance, or worse, imprison her. Cofia turned and passed her robe and hood. Wear this. We're going to step out of this building and head to the one holding the prisoners. What about the guards? I'm waiting for them to pass. And the patrol drones? That's a bit trickier, but the robe and hood should help shield you from the patrol drones. Aria wanted to say something but decided against it. Instead, she began to put on the robe and the hood. Fortunately, it was about her size and provided the necessary disguise. Are you ready? Cofia asked. Aria touched the weapon inside her robe and nodded. She was going to have to depend on Cofia. Cofia opened the door and Aria followed her out into the darkness. "Stay close to me," Cofia hissed. Aria nodded, her face hard with resolve. She hadn't disobeyed orders and crossed enemy lines to get caught. She had to make this final push to get to the humans in captivity. Her heart kept pounding as she followed Cofia across to a gap between two buildings. The buzz of a patrol drone reached her ears. It was coming from her left. But at the right moment, they stepped into the gap, avoiding any patrol drone. As the sound of the patrol drone faded, Aria took deliberate steps down the passageway. Reaching the end, Cofia came to a halt and jabbed a finger at another building. "That's the prison building." Then, to Aria's shock, tall, dark-haired man emerged from the prison building and walked away. "Who is that?" Aria whispered. "One of the humans working with my species," Cofia muttered. Aria shook her head in despair. Cofia kept looking up into the dark sky, obviously searching for any patrol drones. "Now," Cofia said. Aria sprinted behind the female alien as they reached the front entrance to the prison building. Cofia tapped on the panel and stepped inside with Aria. Once the door sealed shut behind her, Aria scanned the interior. A row of prison cells stood ahead of her. Cofia nudged her and they marched down the prison cells, stopping at the first one with a female inside. "Catty," Cofia murmured, glancing further down the row of prison cells. The female inside got to her feet, her eyes brightening as she raced to the front of her prison cell. "I didn't think you would come for us." Cofia gave her a smile and pointed at Aria. "I brought someone to help you." Aria took off her hood. Catty gasped. "It's time to get you all out of here," Aria announced. Chapter 35, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Captain Aria looked at the 5 humans standing in one corner. All of them had been shocked and excited at her appearance. These humans had endured so much at the hands of the Vezat aliens. Despite that, they seemed to be in good health. A few of the men were still rubbing their eyes after being woken up. "Do you understand the plan?" Aria asked. She needed them to be alert. There was no room for mistakes, and the recording device on the ceiling would have detected her already. "What about weapons?" Benjamin asked. Aria turned to Cofia, who shook her head. "We don't have any for you. We just need to escape this base." "Without weapons, they'll gun us down," Benjamin asked. "It won't happen," Cofia said confidently. "Follow Aria." Aria nodded and took charge. Cofia had told her that she'd stay in the shadows and stop anyone who got in their way. Aria wasn't sure about that strategy, but then again she had to trust Cofia. The female alien had gotten her this far. Aria gently opened the front door and peered outside. It looked clear, now or never. Aria opened the door and they snuck out slowly. Aria took the route that Cofia had told her about and turned to the left. Reaching the corner of the prison building, she led the group down the side. According to Cofia, there was a back gate to the base, which they had to blast through. However, Cofia had warned that the patrol drones would converge on them the moment they broke through the gate. Captain Sooty got up from his bed. He had been unable to sleep at all. Strange, but it also implied something to him. Something was wrong. He could sense it. He used to get such feelings when he was in the Vezat homeworld, but it never happened to him all these years on Earth, until tonight. Sooty put on his uniform and stepped out of his quarters. He gripped his weapon in his hands. There had been no alarms so far, but that didn't take away from what he was feeling. He crept forward down the corridor until he reached the front door. He checked his device and was tempted to call Captain Cofia. However, Sooty decided to wait and first check the situation. If it turned out to be a false alarm, he didn't want to go about disturbing others. Opening the door, he stepped out. A drizzle had begun. Soon the rain would come pouring down. Lately, the valley had been experiencing unusual downpours. Sooty hated it because it made walking around the base difficult. He turned around and began walking towards the back of the base. It was a hunch, but he felt something was going on there. As he walked down the side of the quarters building, he froze. Ahead of him, the human captives were walking in a straight line towards the back gate. How was that possible? How had the humans escaped their prison cells? No time to waste. He had to stop them. He couldn't let the human beings escape. Not now. He pulled out his device and pressed it. A shrill alarm went out over the base. Sooty emerged from the shadows and hollered, "Stop!" The lead individual in a robe and hood turned in his direction. Who was this person? Was it the Vezat alien traitor? As the individual in the robe aimed the weapon, Stuti fired it at the humans. 2 humans were hit and went down, clutching their chests. He had no issues of killing the humans. The last thing he wanted was for them to escape and tell others of his base. That would put all his years of work at risk. Stuti aimed to fire at the rest but felt something hit his head and blacked out. Chapter 36, Vezat Base, Granite Valley. Captain Cofia gritted her teeth. She hadn't expected Captain Stuti to emerge out into the night at this hour. Cofia didn't know what had happened, but in the brief instant the alarm had gone off. Stuti had emerged and fired on the humans. Stuti must have sensed something. If not, there was no other reason for him to come out here. Cofia had raced over and hit Stuti on the head. Despite everything Stuti had done, Cofia didn't have it in her to kill her commanding officer. She sighed. She hoped she wouldn't regret it later. Cofia sprinted to the 2 human bodies on the ground. Are they? Aria was kneeling beside them. They're dead. Cofia heaved a loud sigh. You need to go now. Aria glared at her. I can't leave them here. You have to. Cofia hollered. This place will be crawling with soldiers soon. Get out first. Cathy came up to Aria and spoke softly. They didn't have a chance. But we are going to lose our chance if you stay here. Aria shook her head in dismay as she got to her feet. Cofia was relieved, but the other humans looked scared. The death of 2 in their group had left them stunned. Go now, Cofia said. Aria turned to her. What about you? I've planted some explosives along this base, Cofia replied. I need to activate them. I'll then meet you outside. Go. Aria motioned to the other 3 humans and they raced to the back gate of the compound. The hum of a drone reached Cofia's ears. Watch out, Cathy hollered. Cofia turned and fired at it. The drone exploded into a ball of flames, its debris scattering around her. She sprinted to the corner of the prison building and pressed on an explosive. She did the same for the rest of the explosives. In a few minutes, this base would be destroyed, or at least most of it. Everything Captain Stuti had planned for over the years would go down in flames. Cofia dove as weapons fire hit around her. She turned on her back and fired at the patrol drones. Her aim was perfect as it took down the drones. By now the shouts of other Vezat aliens reached her ears. She could only hope Aria and the rest had escaped from the base. Captain Aria fired her weapon at the back gate. Nothing happened. She felt the tension in the air, thick and electric. Every second was a gamble. Step back, Aria warned the rest. She then pulled out 2 grenades and tied it to the gate. She then raced back to join the others. Aria pulled out a device and clicked on it. She covered her face as 2 explosions ripped the back gate apart with a deafening roar. The dark night was momentarily illuminated with a blinding light. At the same time, the hum of patrol drones reached her ears. Take cover. Both Benjamin and Cathy dove to the side with Aria, but the remaining dark-haired man was not fast enough. He froze when the drones appeared, and they gunned him down onto the muddy ground. Aria raised her fists in the air as she fired on the patrol drone. The drone managed to dodge her streaks of weapons fire. Aria rolled away and kept firing. The drone blew up and hit the ground. She couldn't believe she had lost another human. Come on, Cathy yelled. Aria got up and raced behind Benjamin and Cathy. They crawled through the crumpled hole in the back gate. Their footsteps echoed of desperation as their fear propelled them forward. Ahead of them loomed a forest. Aria pointed a finger at it. In there now before any more patrol drones could chase us. As she said those words, the hum of more patrol drones reached her ears. Aria bolted to the tree line and dove behind some bushes. She was breathing hard. She stole a sideways glance and was relieved to find Benjamin and Cathy with her. She had lost 3 of the humans. Aria clenched her jaw. Are you injured? Aria asked. I'm okay, Cathy replied. Aria detected 2 more patrol drones hovering outside the breached back gate. Benjamin nodded. Now what do? Stay quiet, Aria interjected as her eyes fixated on the patrol drones, which were hovering around the back gate of the compound. After a few seconds, the patrol drones flew back into the compound. That was Benjamin's voice trailed off. His words were cut off by an explosion. A plume of smoke shot into the air. Aria realized that Cofia's plan to destroy the alien base had started. Chapter 37, Space Vessel Outside Granite Valley. Captain Williams' senses picked up an explosion, Joss replied. It's quite faint, but it's there. Originally I had thought it was an anomaly, but I confirmed the explosion. Williams suspected the explosion had been able to penetrate whatever was jamming their sensors. Where, in the southern section of the valley, Williams leaned in at the cockpit trying to get a visual on the explosion. Take us to that position now. It had to be the Vezat alien base. There was nothing else out in the region. The space vessel lurched forward as it sped into the valley. Aria and the renegade Vezat must have been behind the explosion. What's the name of this valley? Williams asked. Granite Valley. Watch the... Josh cut in as he pulled on the controls. I'm picking up weapons fire. Another vessel? Williams asked. Negative. Could be armed batteries along the mountains around the valley. Then the entire console lit up with red alerts. Williams tightened his grip on his safety harness. They hadn't tested the space vessel on weapons fire. That was about to change in seconds. Taking evasive countermeasures, Josh hollered. The young man was calm as his fingers danced on the console. The space vessel banked hard to the right. Williams felt his body slam against the side of his chair. Incoming missiles, Josh yelled. Williams sighed. The Vezat aliens had put in place heavy defensive weapons throughout the valley. The vessel banked to the left. Then a shudder rolled through the vessel. What was that? Williams asked. One of the missiles hit us, but our shields are at 90% and holding, Josh replied. There was no way to know how strong the shields would be against alien weapons. When this space vessel and the rest had been developed, alien species were far from anyone's thoughts. But now they would need to enhance the vessel and its shields, considering the existence of alien species. Williams doubted the Vezat aliens were the only species around. If the Vezat existed, many other alien species would also exist. Nevertheless, tonight was the best time to test the vessel's shields. If it could last against the Vezat armed batteries, then they would be in good shape. Josh pulled on the controls, got a lock on 2 armed batteries, firing missiles now. The contrails of 4 missiles shot out across the view screen, heading to the surface. Bright lights lit up across 2 peaks on the right of the valley. Josh raised his fist, got them. Another round of red alerts flashed across the console. Josh heaved a loud sigh as he pulled on the controls. The Vezat aliens had protected this valley with heavy weapons. The Vezat aliens must have anticipated a day like today might come. More incoming missiles, Josh groaned. I don't know how many more armed batteries they have. Call in reinforcements, Williams said. Affirmative. Williams had enough of the Vezat aliens. The additional vessels would destroy all the armed batteries. There would be nothing left of them in this valley. What's that? Josh asked. Williams turned his attention to the left of the view screen. His eyes widened. Get us out of here now. A white light appeared out of nowhere and came rushing at them in a fury. The light hit their vessel and multiple shutters rolled through it. The consoles flared up with all kinds of alerts and alarms. I'm losing power, Josh hollered. The man kept pressing on the console, but nothing happened. The hum in the engines began to fade. By now, the white light had disappeared and the darkness in the valley had returned. Bringing up auxiliary power, Josh reported. Get us out of the valley. But, sir, that's an order. Josh nodded and the vessel banked to the left and began moving across the southern edge of Granite Valley. For a split second, the white light had struck fear in Williams' heart. He couldn't explain it. Was it a Vezat alien flying to the vessel? That had been Williams' first thought, but it sounded impossible. Then he recalled reading about the light hitting the United Alliance shuttle in space and destroying the space shuttle. It had to be something like that, but what it was would remain a mystery. What was that light, sir? Josh asked nervously. Williams shrugged. Until we find out, we can't go back into that valley. Inform the reinforcements. Affirmative. Williams chose not to tell the young man the rest of his thoughts on their encounter with the white light. He felt that if they had stayed longer over Granite Valley, the entire space vessel could have been destroyed. If it had been a helipod, they would have already been dead. The hull and the shields surrounding the space vessel had probably saved them. As they left the valley, Williams bit his lip. They couldn't return to the valley until the Vezat aliens on the ground had been neutralized. Chapter 38, Vezat-based Granite Valley. Captain Cofia ran around with her weapon in her hands. She was barking orders to the soldiers stationed around the base. Another explosion ripped through the base. She smiled to herself. Her plan was working. However, she had been distraught that a few of the humans had died during the escape. And she still didn't know how Captain Stooty had gotten himself into the thick of things. It didn't matter. Flames were growing across multiple buildings on the base. She had also caught a glimpse of missiles being launched by the armed batteries around the valley. The human vessels must have entered the valley. It was the best she could hope for. A male Vezat came up to her. "Captain, what are your orders?" "Secure the base," Cofia ordered. "The fires are spreading faster than expected," the Vezat soldier replied. "We need to abandon the base." Cofia pretended to pause for a long moment. "Proceed with the plan. Where's Captain Sooty?" "I saw him walking in the other direction, giving orders," the Vezat soldier replied. Cofia offered a single nod. Sooty would be furious with everything that had happened tonight. He wouldn't stay still. He would want revenge. It was time for Cofia to disappear. Sooty will probably think she got killed. Cofia began to slowly make her way to the back gate of the base. She kept scanning her surroundings. Soldiers were running about. Few humans were still reeling from the attack. Cofia kept walking until she reached the remnants of the back gate. Aria had done a good job of destroying the gate. Another explosion ripped through the air behind Cofia. There would be a few more. Captain Sooty would be forced to abandon the base, knowing that the humans had found it. Whether Sooty would escape or not was something Cofia wasn't sure about, but it was no longer her concern. Her mission had been accomplished. A patrol drone appeared above. Cofia fired upon it, bringing it down in a ball of flames. Cofia then sprinted into the tree line. Taking cover behind a tree, Cofia looked back at the base on fire. Multiple fires were now raging as the last explosion ripped through another building. Cofia had planted all the explosives the night before, ensuring maximum damage to the base and its buildings. "Cofia," a voice said softly behind her. Cofia swirled around only to face Aria. "You made it. We lost one more," Aria said in motion to Benjamin and Cathy, who were standing a distance away. "The base is destroyed, but I think your human vessels were forced to retreat." "Huh?" "The armed batteries were activated and kept firing on one of the vessels. I think that vessel took out a few armed batteries, but there's many more along this valley." Over the years, Sooty ensured that multiple redundancies were established. "Does that mean other vessels can't come in?" Cofia shrugged. "It depends on those vessels. I did notice that those vessels were different from the fighter jets and helipods." Aria nodded. "They are new space vessels." Cofia's eyes widened. "You humans continue to impress me. I heard they were built in a secret facility and are under the coalition forces, but they're building more. Once Sooty finds out, he'll be furious. It'll force him to pause and rethink everything," Cofia said. Sooty always assumed that the humans would not have any spacefaring capabilities for another few years. Sooty had been banking on it, but now his assumption had been proven wrong. The humans had again, beyond the shadow of a doubt, demonstrated their tenacity to innovate and achieve breakthroughs. Aria pointed back to the base. "Who's that?" Cofia gazed in the same direction and sighed. Sooty was standing around giving out orders. Cofia had hoped in her heart that Sooty would give up, but Cofia knew better. Sooty would take this destruction of the base as a challenge. He would never give up. That's Captain Sooty. "What's he doing?" Aria asked. Cofia studied Sooty's mouth. It only took her a few seconds to realize that Sooty was coming after them. "We need to move out. Sooty's preparing a group to hunt us down." "How does he know we survived?" Cathy asked. "Our footprints are still present," Aria lamented. Unfortunately, the rain had stopped pouring down and hadn't washed away their footprints. Cofia turned and passed some weapons and grenades to Benjamin and Cathy. "Do you know how to use those?" Aria asked. Benjamin exchanged a look with Cathy. "We'll figure it out." Cofia then gestured to them. They all turned and began walking deeper into the valley, with Aria taking point and Cofia the rear. The end.